the same wall on the other side. So I think if I whitewash this whole thing, I won't have to remove the graffiti. That's my hope. Another wall done. This is apparently a separate wall again. That graffiti is going to be pretty annoying, I can already tell. So I'm going to buy a little bit of universal cleaner just to clean up these walls extra quick. Because a few quick sprays is worth like $1.50 to me. But that's going to save me so much time that it's absolutely worth it. I'll just spray the big graffiti. That'll really clean up the wall. Okay, I thought this would be easier to do, but apparently you gotta get like all the graffiti to finish this wall because it's a very, very particular wall. Finally finished that entire wall and got rewarded $5 whole for doing it. So that obviously feels pretty damn good. Another railing, another $5. At this rate, we'll be able to buy the new pressure washer by next year. Didn't realize I really had to clean on top of all these too. Not that it's a big area, it's just really annoying to have to chase this ladder around the entire time. What do you think happens if we just use a universal spray all over the ground? Actually does a pretty ugly job. The white nozzle is just going to be faster. I'm about 70% done the floor apparently, which is clearly a separate piece from over there. Found the seam between the two. I like how I can use this bench as a guide finally, because I do not walk in straight lines. Just about done the floor on this side though, so that's a big step. We're 20% of the way done the skate park already. That's 1/5. And I'm almost as disappointed as I am excited because that means we're almost done. $40 for the floor? I'll take it. I feel like this bench is going to be a little more difficult, but if I can green nozzle it, I'm pretty happy about that because that's pretty satisfying. There's still a little bit of crap left behind, but I can spot clean it afterwards. Because I can clean it, but it's pretty slow. Actually, since it's all one part, I might not even have to do the bad spots. As long as I get most of it, it might let me get away with not doing the worst little spots. Looks like I'm not going to get away with that. I'm going to have to do all the stupid little spots. I could probably use the orange nozzle to blast them away very fast. And the bench is done, $25. Now I just need to do everything else. These graffiti stains are starting to get pretty annoying. I'm going to go through probably the rest of my cleaner removing these. And that's going to get expensive. That's actually eating into my profit pretty badly. Officially 25% of the way done the skate park. Another railing done. This whole side of the park is just about done. Just a little more graffiti and probably the top of the damn wall. It's always the top of the wall and I can't even walk up there. It's so annoying. I've got 3% of my cleaning spray left. How much are we going to get done with that? Not a ton. Well, we're going to buy some more of that because I just don't have the patience to do all that. $15 of profit. That's as much as I'm going to make for this entire wall. Hard to justify using this. Maybe if I buy the better nozzle. Never mind. It looks like there's only one that we even can buy for this one. So, yeah. I don't really even know where to start with all of this. I think I can mostly use the whitewasher for this, but it's kind of intimidating. Maybe we'll start with the walls. Because they should be easy, with the exception of a little bit of graffiti and maybe whatever's on top, but they're very satisfying. Is it really worth using this spray on the graffiti? Like, it's so expensive, but it does save time. I'm very conflicted on this. Maybe I really will use it as very sparingly, kind of like that, and then a little bit there, and make sure we're nice and close, that way we do get the mass of it on. Another wall done. I didn't really see how much money I got for it, but I'll take it whatever it was. Can we just leave the graffiti there? It looks good anyways. New strategy. I'm just going to leave the graffiti to the very end, and then I can kind of get a better estimate of whether or not it's worth it to use cleaning chemicals on them, because again, expensive. If I have to use cleaning chemicals on all the graffiti, I'm not going to make any money. That wall might have been the easiest $5 I've ever made. I felt like I just looked at it and it was clean. And good news, we're getting more of that metal that's very hard to clean even with high-powered chucks. But the areas aren't really big enough that I'm going to bother with more chemicals. Again, I'm just trying to not to spend any money right now. Because that railing only gave me $5. I probably could use $5 chemicals just cleaning it, and that wouldn't have taken long at all. Things definitely feel extra clean when it's just a clean gray concrete like that. I just finished a whole bunch of walls and made a whole bunch of money. Basically all the walls up until that. That big railing was super annoying to do. Kind of wish I saw what I got for it, but maybe better I didn't. 42% done already. It's amazing how quickly you just kind of zone out, and before you know it, this happens. And then, before you know it, all the walls are done, with the exception of the graffiti, but the graffiti's gonna wait. Now we're gonna find out how easy these are gonna be, and these don't actually look so bad, because I can mostly do them with the whitewasher. I don't know why, but I find that so satisfying just going around the base of things. $25 for doing that? That's awesome. Are there any more of these we can do? There sure are, and I didn't really have to be that thorough on that last one, so I'm hoping this one's kind of the same way, where I'm just going to kind of half-ass it, and then by the time I'm mostly done, it pays me. There it is, $15 for doing a little corner ramp. I think this one's considered its own separate ramp too, and that's not going to take long at all, because it's not very big. And it seems pretty straightforward unless I'm missing something. The railing on it's probably considered a different piece, but this seems to be all it is because we're already like halfway done this. $15 for that? I need to be focusing more on the expensive items. This rail is another one of those annoying spots. You have to get every stupid little angle and it's very hard to even see them all. Those stairs for $25? That took me like 10 seconds. Everything's so disproportionate. So this big simple ramp is probably worth like $150 to do it all because look how big it is. Oh, this is just considered... Oh, no, this is still considered the ramp. Watch, we could basically do it all right now, and it's going to be worth $1 billion. Turns out this one is a little more involved than I thought, but still not by much, because I just got to do this little wing wall. And find where the last little bit of dirt is hiding on it. I feel like it's so clean. Maybe along this edge? Yep, $15. So then we'll do this nice ramp, because this is going to be a pretty easy one too. Each thing just more satisfying than the last. Prototypes only were $10, but we're suddenly 54% of the way done. We're probably actually a little more than that because the graffiti is holding up the walls. Those walls probably count for a lot. So we'll just keep working our way along. What a contrast. Look how clean it is compared to everything else. There's a second set of stairs that I could probably do pretty quickly. These ones seem a little bit grimier, but they're really not that bad overall. We could probably green nozzle them, just like the other ones. This should take most of the stuff off. I barely even need to scan it. I can just go over it and we'll be done. So when you stand here, it actually looks like a fairly clean skate park overall. But it's getting there. We're 63% of the way done already. It's probably been like 18 hours, but it felt like it went fast. This part's kind of fun. Feels like I'm washing in the top of a watermelon. Upon washing the inside, I realized that it actually is supposed to be a watermelon. So my instincts were correct. The entire arch is done for $30. That puts me back over $1,000. And there's not many surfaces left to do. It's mostly floors and this pool. Okay, well this pool is kind of very dirty and it's got some of the really tough resistant stains on it. So I'm just going to do the edges to make sure these don't count. And then we're going to do a very hard scrub on the inside. Now that's all clean except for the inside of, yet again, a watermelon. And luckily it looks like we can green nozzle away most of this grime, so that makes my job a lot easier. One last little strip left. This shouldn't take long at all.
$15 for cleaning my watermelon.
This part is definitely satisfying, that clean gray color down below. Just gotta slow it down a little bit to do a thorough clean. Yeah, this is gonna be good. $50 for doing this upper floor? Like, it's a pretty big area, but you can do it so quick. That makes me think that lower floor is gonna be worth a fortune once it's done, because it's a big area. Again, it's not really going to take that long because you can do it basically like this, and it's pretty quick. Now, this upper floor is being difficult. I feel like there's a fairly large area I'm missing somewhere because it really looks like it's about done to me. Okay, got it. It was just crap everywhere. $50 for that. Now let's do the big floor, which at a glance seems like it would be a big task to do, but basically I'm just going to do this over the whole thing, and it's going to go pretty quick. I just realized how good the water looks, like the reflection on the water as it sprays to the right like that. Very good job. I don't even know how long I've been doing this, but it's been very fun the entire time. Let's take a look. Yeah, we're actually very close to done suddenly, and I had no idea. This little guy is the last little strip, and I can't wait to see how much I'm going to get paid for doing the entire floor. I'm thinking... I was going to say $200. Only $100? I'll get $50 for doing this little piece. Anyways, we're 99% done because there's graffiti to do. And I'm feeling pretty impatient overall, so I'm going to definitely use the spray to take care of most of this. $5 plus probably another $5 for this wall. Probably $5 for this wall. There actually wasn't as much graffiti in the end as I thought. I think I was just kind of seeing it disproportionately early because I just happened to be in the right areas for it. Because now it definitely seems worth it to spend whatever was $15 on this spray because I've cleaned like 7 walls so far with it. And I'm not really sure what I have left to do. Right? There's a wall over there that needs to be done. It's the one up top. So there's a couple sprays there. That wall is done. And there's something there. The gate needs to be done still. Oh, I see. $10 for the gate. Alright, so what do we have left? One thing, walls, two walls. One of which is basically the first wall I did here. I guess I got lazy on that one. But I get to use my stool for the first time ever. I'm assuming it's mostly just the tops of this one because the wall itself is pretty clean. There, done. Not sure which wall it is now, so I'm just going to scan around trying to find one that's not quite finished yet. And apparently it is really hard to find because all of these walls are done. And it's nothing in the weird little corner. I don't really know what to make of this. I'm pretty sure I just scanned every wall in the skate park and none of them seem to have anything left to do. Wait, it's this wall right here. It's beside the one I just cleaned because I'm stupid. Shouldn't be too much to get this one finished. $5 and there we go. We're up to $1,500 total, 200 extra for completing the job. This was satisfying. Not sure how long it took, but I enjoyed every bit of it. And here's more or less the order we did it in. I like how I did it kind of from outside to inside. That felt very satisfactory too.
The way that my hair naturally sits these days, I look like a mix between emo Peter Parker and I would like to speak to your manager, and there's only one way to fix that. Welcome back to the Philip DeFranco Show. It is Monday, June 21st, 2021. Hit that like button to support the video. Hit that subscribe button for your chance to win $5,000 at the end of the month. Let's just jump into it. First up today, let's definitely talk about this controversy that we're seeing right now in the world of online entertainment, specifically on Twitch. You know, this is kind of the continuation of a past controversy we talked about. Right there, you had an increasing number of female streamers that were streaming from hot tubs and pools, scantily clad. In general, these streamers were kind of trying to ride the line of the terms of service on Twitch. Ultimately, Twitch ended up addressing it. Among other things, they made hot tub streams its own category, which resulted in a lot of people saying, you're just kind of kicking the can down the road. You're going to have another controversy. Even people like Pokimane speaking up.
Listen, Twitch, it doesn't matter if you make a new section for this or if you ban these individual people, because, or if you ban hot tub streams indoors, they're gonna find another way to push the envelope. They basically implemented a band-aid fix as opposed to treating the root cause.
And as it turns out, she was exactly right. We started seeing the rise of ASMR streams, but I don't even feel comfortable calling them ASMR streams. Like when most people think of ASMR streams, they probably think of something like this. But the ASMR streams that we're talking about on Twitch, I don't even know if I could show this. With some streamers like Amaranth doing whatever this is. I stopped the clip right there, not to save you, because I would show you, I would let it continue, just so you could feel as fucking weird as I feel right now. But yeah, she goes on to, among other things, simulate sounds that sound like oral. So with all of that, we ended up seeing some temporary bans on big names like Indie Fox and Amaranth. Also with that, we saw people like esports and gaming host Frankie Ward tweet. I'd say mic-licking Metagate is not hurting solely women on Twitch, but hurting Twitch in general. I'm not anti-hot tub streams, I've written about why, but the presentation by the banned streamers charging subs for licking ASMR mics suggestively is an issue. Woman in a bikini equals front covers of regular mags on the beach, poolside, person simulating a sexual act, and with financial incentive to do so, not something you'd see below the top shelf in general public. As well as streamers like Sweettail saying that Twitch has opened up a door.
They're literally bending over, doggy style, sucking on a microphone, and making ear-licking noises, and staring at the camera, making eye contact. In the ASMR category. Like, what the Don't get me wrong, these girls are killing it. They're making great money, that's great, and I am not. I love women. If you want to do your own, if you want to have an OnlyFans, you want to be, and these women are gorgeous, don't get me wrong. But I just don't think Twitch is the platform for that. It's not.
Some even arguing that by allowing this content, Twitch is inviting a kind of creepy demographic that's going to harass women. But regarding that specific argument, you have people pushing back, people like 39 Daff saying, the problem with your statement is assuming it attracts a demographic that further hurts its female streamers, etc. But in my opinion, it doesn't. People who want to harass women on Twitch were already going to harass them. I highly doubt people who subscribe and pay for Amaranth/Indie Fox's OnlyFans are the ones actively going around harassing other women. With Amaranth herself even responding, saying the people we bring are far, far, far more mild-mannered and open-minded than the average gamer bro. And I would go as far as to say the dramatic cacophony litany of voices saying it hurts the platform actually hurts the platform due to shining a spotlight on a molehill. Self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, obviously, there is a debate to be had there, and I would love to know your thoughts and opinions on that in the comments down below. What I would say is, even if it is short-lived, this controversy and scandal and even the ban seem to be beneficial for these women. Amouranth saying that it seemed like her ban actually helped her OnlyFans with her getting 587 new subscribers just an hour or two after it happened. Right, and it's important to remember, it's not just the money from subscriptions that end up being big for these women, but also the paid messaging. Hell, I mean, Corinna Kopp, who of course we talked about her launching an OnlyFans last week, tweeted that she made $165,000 on just one picture of her boobs. Which brings us to our most important online story of the day. I am not making as much money as I should be, which is why I am so excited to announce, in completely serious and not a joke news, I and Ethan Klein will be getting into the ring and boxing in what has been called the Battle of the Dad Bod. And if and when I win, I get his 5%. In the unlikely event I lose, maybe I have a brain aneurysm, I don't know. I'll buy you and your family VIP tickets to Disney. Yeah, serious stakes, you coward. Then, in a story about outrage and backlash that I definitely wanted to update since we talked about accusations last week, we had Chrissy Teigen back in the news. She, of course, last week coming back to social media, apologizing again for past comments that she made. Saying at that time she was a troll, there was no excuse for what she did, she's a different person now, there's a lot of people that she still needs to apologize to. Like we talked about last week, after she did this, designer and former Project Runway contestant Costello said on Instagram that he was actually bullied by Teigen back in 2014, with him specifically saying that the bullying drove him to having suicidal thoughts, claiming that Teigen and her stylist made it hard for him to work in the industry, bullying him, saying that he should die. But as it turns out, following that, we ended up seeing a report from Insider that found technical inconsistencies in the purported DMs that could suggest they are manipulated, and noting several visual identifiers in the images appear to come from various iterations of Instagram and Teigen's profile throughout the years, which is oftentimes a signature of manipulated imagery, with it noting that Teigen had been verified in 2015, but that there was no blue check next to her name suggesting that the screenshot was taken in 2014. But reportedly, the issue with that is that the message backgrounds have the purple and blue gradient, which didn't exist until 2020 when she was verified, so that appears to be inconsistent. There's also a video chat icon at the top of the image, which is a feature that wasn't introduced until 2015, and the photo in the corner is also the profile picture she used in 2014, 2016. Any screenshot taken after that would show her current picture. It turns out that there was a lot of things that didn't add up, and actually Teigen herself ended up saying that the DMs were fake, sharing a statement on social media saying the screenshots were fictional, adding that, yeah, she did comment on one of his posts in 2014 when he was accused of making a racist remark, but saying that after he denied it and said that the remark was photoshopped, Chrissy deleted her comment, saying she never conspired to ruin his career, and actually the stylist that Michael claimed bullied him with Chrissy didn't even work with her until 2016. The statement also saying that Chrissy thought she had a cordial friendship with him. Screenshots also being shared of Instagram interactions, which included Michael complimenting her lipstick and food and other mundane and normal interactions. And so following all of that, we saw Michael deleting the original post accusing Teigen of bullying him, but also we saw him respond saying that Teigen and her team, quote, are working so hard, so strategically to come out against the DM she sent me, and to downplay the comments she publicly posted on my Instagram only proves that she is the same bully she always has been, despite her fake apology to the public. Still, that doesn't appear to fully address the allegedly doctored images that he was sharing. Also, it does appear that with Costello doing this, he put a big target on his back. Since he shared that now deleted Instagram post, we've seen people coming out accusing him of sexual harassment, overt racism, body shaming, and it's still a developing situation over there, so obviously you have to wait and see. But I think one of the biggest things with this story is it does appear to shine a light on an issue that we've seen in a number of these instances. Right? Insert a person that's having some sort of scandal or big backlash because they're getting hit so hard here, their characters being called into question. We sometimes end up seeing people just making shit up and piling on. Because often the pile-on is so big and crazy, everything is kind of assumed to be true if it's negative about the person that's at the center of it. But from that, I want to take a second to thank the sponsor of today's show, the new and improved Bill.Ting.com. Since switching to Ting's Unlimited Pro plan, I save around $42 a month compared to my previous provider. Most importantly, it was easy and I had the same coverage as before, and the only thing that changed was the lower monthly bill. Plus, for a limited time, Ting is offering their unlimited plan for just $25 a month for the first 3 months if you activate 14 days. Also, Ting's Flex Plan is the pay for what you use pricing model, but even cheaper. It's just $5 per gigabyte, and like always, data usage is shared across all your devices, so the more phones you have on one account, the less you pay per device. So, whether you're someone that uses 2 or 20 gigabytes a month, there is a perfect Ting plan for you and your family. Just head on over to Phil.Ting.com to check your phone, create an account, and pick the plan that's right for you. Then, Ting sends you a SIM card that you'll pop into your phone and activate in minutes. See how much you can save on your monthly phone bill at phil.thing.com and get $25 off today. Then we definitely need to talk about this morning the Supreme Court ruling unanimously against the NCAA. So the case in question centered around whether the NCAA was violating antitrust laws when it limited the amount students to receive scholarships for graduate degrees, paid internships, musical instruments, computers, and other free education benefits. So the student athletes that brought the case arguing that the NCAA was running a system that restrained competition. Thought you had the NCAA arguing that their rules were exempt from antitrust laws because they were needed to preserve the image of amateurism in college sports and prevent colleges from recruiting athletes by offering over-the-top benefits worth thousands of dollars. But essentially the Supreme Court's response was shut your dumb ass up. And so as far as what the Supreme Court ruled, in the court's opinion delivered by Justice Neil Gorsuch, he wrote that the Supreme Court was upholding a lower court decision to lift, quote, rules that limit scholarships for graduate or vocational school, payments for academic tutoring, or paid post-eligibility internships, while also leaving in place rules aimed at ensuring student athletes do not receive unlimited payments unrelated to education. Or in other words, athletes can receive additional education Though, I do want to clarify, this does not have anything to do with the ongoing debate over allowing student athletes to make money off their name, image, and likeness through things like brand deals and appearances, though some have speculated that this ruling could have an indirect impact on those kinds of discussions. But also very notably here, in a concurring opinion, Justice Brett Kavanaugh accused the NCAA of acting, quote, above the law and questioned whether more rules should be ended. Writing the NCAA's remaining compensation rules also raised serious questions under the antitrust law. And that, is absolutely massive because he's effectively saying that the organization will have trouble defending its rule that players cannot be compensated. It's essentially a signal to student athletes that they should file a new lawsuit challenging the remaining restrictions the NCAA has on compensation, which is also why it's not surprising that Steve Berman, an attorney for the college athletes who filed the suit, said, "It is our hope that this victory in the battle for college athletes' rights will carry on a wave of justice, uplifting further aspects of athlete compensation. This is the fair treatment college athletes deserve." California Governor Gavin Newsom also celebrating this win, tweeting, "The NCAA's bankrupt model is finally starting to come apart. Sickening that colleges reap billions from student athletes will block them from earning a single dollar. This brings us one step closer to fixing it." Then, in actually very important political news, we talk about this story that's actually two stories. One, right, the headline, you have Senate Democrats set to officially introduce the voting rights bill on the floor. And two, this could also be the beginning of a story where more moderate Democrats realize that their goal of compromise is really an impossible thing to do with the Republican Party of today. But the party that after January 6th decided the course of action to take was to throw Liz Cheney under the bus and still stay in the good graces of Donald Trump, that maybe they're not, making good faith arguments. And that now could be a good time to change the game plan from what Democrats have kind of done really well for the last 40 years, and that is lose with style. Democracy in the United States is in a very weakened and vulnerable state right now, and you have a number of Democrats out there acting like it's just business as usual. Right, so those are the two stories in one, and here's the meat. Right, so the procedural vote to start debate on the legislation is scheduled for tomorrow. And this comes as more and more Democrats and progressive activists have begun to embrace a more watered-down version of the bill proposed by Joe Manchin, the sole Democrat who opposed the initial bill on the ground that it was too partisan. But here's the thing. While Democrats spent the weekend hashing out the final details of compromise on Manchin's bill, which he has touted as a more bipartisan compromise, Senate Republicans have still broadly rejected it, with Minority Leader Mitch McConnell calling it equally unacceptable and predicting that no members of his party will vote in favor. And so, as a result, the legislation is all but guaranteed to fail in the chamber, where it will require all 50 Democrats and at least 10 Republicans to overcome the filibuster. But, very notably here, bringing the bill to the floor could actually still be good for Democrats if it allows some people to see what the reality of the situation is. Or because this could lay the groundwork for the party to justify scrapping the filibuster altogether. Right? If Joe Manchin agrees to some form of the bill, which the Republicans then filibuster, Democrats could then say, hey, we have the votes to approve the legislation if we get rid of the filibuster. Joe, don't you see that it's not about compromise, it's about stonewall. Bipartisanship cannot be a precondition to taking action to secure our democracy if it relies on reaching a common ground with a party that is increasingly and transparently committed to undermining that democracy. And secondly, it shows the minority rule party that is the GOP is abusing existing Senate rules to block highly popular policy changes. But after the insurrection and amid the growing efforts by Republican governors and legislatures to restrict voting access in the United States, there has been broad public support for federal action to protect our endangered democracy. And here's the thing, tomorrow we may even see the Republicans filibuster the vote to even proceed to debate this, with that including even discussing Manchin's plan to be crafted specifically to reach a compromise with the GOP. And ultimately, with this story, or honestly anything else that I talked about today, I'd love to know your thoughts in those comments down below, because one, this is supposed to be a conversation, and two, this is the end of today's show. As always, thanks for being a part of the family. Subscribe and like and all the good stuff. If you're looking forward to watching it covered right here or in those top links down below. But, of course, as always, my name's Philip DeFranco. You've just been filled in. I got the old faces, and I'll see you tomorrow.
So I was in the Discord server talking to you guys. By the way, some of the mods that we have are going back to work, so they don't really have the same kind of free time they did before. So we've got applications open for new moderators. Make sure you guys go check that out if you want to be a mod in the Discord server. But I was talking to a bunch of you guys, and a lot of you guys said I should be checking out the Joker solo series. You guys said it was really good. And I know I haven't covered a lot of DC recently, largely because DC's not necessarily resonating with me, but I think maybe it was just the beginning of the stories, so it's probably worth going back and looking at the stories in terms of how they progress, and then deciding whether or not I want to cover them anymore. But this Joker story, I'm glad you guys suggested it. This is like one of the best Joker stories that I think I've ever read, right? So, here's the cool thing. A lot of this really comes out of Joker, right? When Joker just kind of unleashed all kinds of chaos on Gotham City and all that kind of stuff. And if you guys are unfamiliar with Batman up to this point, make sure you guys check out the link down in the description. It'll take you to the Batman playlist so you can get caught up. But the whole thing about this is that we kind of pick up here with Commissioner Gordon. And one of the things that goes on is Commissioner Gordon is basically a cop bar. For those of you guys don't know what that is, and I don't know if anybody outside the States is familiar with that, but here in the States, you largely have bars that are considered cop bars in the sense that the average Joe doesn't go there, right? I mean, you could, but you're probably going to start getting funny looks when people realize that you're not a cop, right? That's one of the places where, like, only cops ever really go there. And a lot of them might exchange stories or kind of talk about cases they're working and different things along those lines, but just kind of a place for cops to kind of unpack and then just do their thing, right? Drink or whatever the case is. For Commissioner Gordon, or I guess really former Commissioner Gordon here now, he's retired, but with Gordon talking to one of the guys he used to work with, this guy's name is Danny Ryan, right? And he was a cop at one point in time, and had long since retired. The way it's explained is that his dad had been one of the cops that kind of came up during the age of Al Capone, right? So like, you know, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre and that kind of thing. But Danny starts talking to Gordon about good and evil, right? About what it really means to actually see a criminal. And when he looks at Gordon, he sees a guy who's so young, right? He's like, in time, you're going to start coming across guys who are pretty extreme, right? And who are pretty bad. Now, a lot of this is kind of told in hindsight. At the moment, Gordon is sort of, is basically retired. This is somewhat early in his career. And the conversation as it goes on here is Danny basically tells him, there's criminals out there, right? There's guys who rob banks and guys who kill people and things like that. Like, sure, there's criminals. Then there's evil. There's criminals who are just on a whole different level. Now, this is really before Commissioner Gordon has really ran into the Joker as we know, right? This is still when he's kind of working his way up the ranks. And what Danny says is this is a time early on in his career when he ended up coming across or was kind of working this case where he basically saw what he considers to be the devil, right? That he was working this case of this missing 17-year-old girl. And when he found her, there was a guy who would quite literally or was in the process of eating her face. And he offered a piece to Danny Ryan, right? And Danny just didn't quite know how to handle it, but he followed the rules of the law, right? He did what the law told him to do, which was to draw his gun and to make sure this guy gets arrested and then he goes on trial and all that kind of stuff. And he says that's how things work in an idealistic world. In the real world, it doesn't work that way. He's like, when you come across evil, you put a bullet in its brain. Like, you just do that and you don't ever look back. And while Commissioner Gordon initially dismissed that, over the course of his career, he has learned there is something in effect where there comes a point when he will encounter individuals who are just so heinously evil, the best thing you possibly can do for society as a whole is to really just kill them. And in his mind, that's the Joker. And so what you do is you kind of pick up the modern era and what's called A-Day. And A-Day was basically this giant attack on Arkham Asylum. And it wasn't necessarily one of these things where, like, the Joker did some stuff and got away, because the Joker's not locked up in Arkham. Instead, what had happened is 500 people had been killed in Arkham. And the reason why is there's a couple things happening. The first is a guy by the name of Mayor Nakano, who is really kind of given to us as largely an inept person, right? Doesn't quite really know what he's doing, doesn't really understand what it means to be a mayor in the city of Gotham. He's really causing more problems than he's actually solving. But the other part of this is that it all looks like it was done by the Joker, that it was some kind of modified version of the Joker toxin that basically spread its way throughout the prison and then killed a whole bunch of different people. But while Commissioner Gordon's working this case and even presenting the evidence to Batman, albeit with Batman's now limited resources, one of the things that he kind of hits on here is things don't make sense, right? Something's not right. The Joker usually always leaves a calling card or something along those lines. The fact that this isn't there seems kind of strange, but at the same time, it really is just kind of of the Joker's MO, right? To kill like 500 people and just sort of call it a day. And so what you end up getting here is this moment where James Gordon is just kind of leaving and then, sort of going back and doing his thing, and is suddenly met by a woman by the name of Cressida, right? Now, she meets him in a limousine. There's this great big huge imposing figure behind him, like scary, and she's like, we need to have a conversation about the Joker, right? Now, as soon as they end up getting to the house that she's in, it's like this totally different situation than what he was expecting, right? What ends up happening is we find out the Joker is actually in Belize. And that's one of the funny things about his character. The Joker, whenever you usually see him in Batman comics, it's, the Joker's assault on Gotham. You don't really see the Joker in foreign countries, but he is, right? He's literally in Belize, just kind of hiding out. There's a reason for that, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit, but the proposal that's put forward by Cressida here is because of Jim Gordon's experience in hunting the Joker and dealing with the Joker, the kind of things the Joker's done to him, right? So like injuring Barbara Gordon, turning his son James against him, or really kind of bringing his son James down to the Joker's level, taking what chance he had to regain his sanity and kind of wiping it away. She basically says, we have an idea, right? You have more experience with him than anybody else. We want you to hunt the Joker. Like, we want you to find the Joker for us. In return, we will give you a bank card with unlimited funds. There is no limit. And then when you're done and you're back, we'll give you $25 million in your personal account. And then when he's kind of like, okay, I mean, you want me to grab the Joker and bring him in for $25 million bucks. That sounds like a bounty. And the answer she gives is no. I mean, that's not really what we were shooting for. I guess it kind of is a bounty to a degree, but if all we wanted was for the Joker to be handed over to the authorities, we would hire the authorities to do it. We want you to kill the Joker. The authorities are not going to do that. We can't hire cops to kill a Joker, at least not publicly anyway. And we certainly can't do it with the government, right? I mean, maybe they could, maybe they can't, but whatever the case is, this has to be done discreetly, right? It has to be done quietly. And so it's one of these things where he's a little on the fence about it, and then suddenly the conversation that he had with Danny Ryan at the beginning of the story kind of comes back again when she asked the question, do you believe in evil? And when the answer is yes, yes I do, then in turn it's the Joker's evil. We need you to take care of him. And so what you end up doing is switching back over to Belize, Joker reading the newspaper, and then coming to this realization that everything that's going on in Arkham is being made to look like he's the one that did it, right? So seemingly, the Joker doesn't really have a hand in any of this. And so following that, you get a few different things going on, right? First, you end up transitioning to this kind of woman who's in this great big huge incubation tank in Santa Prisca. Not a whole lot going on there, at least as far as the revelation goes. But then there's also other things, like a brother and a sister who basically get a kind of text message, right? Like another guy who gets a text message. All these people are being contacted. And so ultimately, Jim Gordon meets up with Batman and then spills the beans. Now again, one of the things to remember about Batman here is Batman doesn't have the same kind of resources that he did. Because of the Joker War, it basically came to public light that Batman had been sending money to like offshore accounts. He had in effect been violating like tax laws. And so in order to ensure those waters can be navigated and Bruce Wayne can maintain his role as Batman, Lucius Fox effectively took over control of Wayne Industries. And so Bruce Wayne doesn't have control of his own company. At the same time, they have to distance themselves from him in order to clear up all the red tape. That was basically DC kind of coming back and saying, okay, so like we're gonna separate Batman from like the whole wealth and all that kind of stuff and take him back to his roots of just being a pretty basic detective with some incredible skills, a really, really good knowledge of like how to fight various villains, and like that's gonna be it, right? We're going old school is essentially what they were doing, which is great, right? It's a really, really cool thing. And so when Gordon meets with Bruce, he kind of tells him everything that's going on, right? The fact that he met with Cressida, the fact that he was given, or at least promised $25 million for killing the Joker and bringing him in. And it's kind of a funny thing because where Bruce kind of looks at him and says like, you really want to do this, don't you? The response of Gordon is, I do. But there's almost this kind of inner monologue that he has where he's like, I don't really want to admit that out loud, right? Like, I don't want to say, yes, I want to kill the Joker, because if he admits it, it means it's something that he publicly and really just fully desires. So long as he doesn't publicly say it, then at least there's some part of him that can believe that he doesn't want to actually do it. But the reality is, this is personal for Gordon, right? Like, it's a very, very personal thing. And so he basically tells Batman, here's what I need from you, right? I need every single thing that you have on the Joker. Everything, everything, everything. I don't want any of that stuff left out. I want you to have your people research this girl and tell me what it is that you guys know about her. Beyond that, I want access to your Bat computer. I want to know every single file, right? Everything that's ever happened. I want to use your database to fill in the blanks of what I have with the Joker. Because at the end of the day, Commissioner Gordon's knowledge about the Joker is nowhere near as extensive as Batman. Gordon needs that to actually do his investigation and to get all that stuff figured out. The other thing about this is Oracle is listening, right? Barbara Gordon is listening. And one of the things to remember is Commissioner Gordon doesn't actually know that Barbara Gordon is Oracle or even Batgirl. And so you kind of have this bit of a thing where you know, Batman's like, Oracle, are you listening? She's like, yes. I just want to go on record. This is a terrible decision. Gordon's gonna get himself killed. But there's also a big difference between what he's saying, right? He didn't promise you that he would bring the Joker in. He just said it would make sense to do it. And that seems to be a bit of a detail that Batman actually missed, because it kind of catches him off guard for a moment, and then he kind of looks at Gordon like, are you really gonna kill the Joker? And that's when Gordon pulls a distraction by essentially pulling his ace out of the hole and just asking the question, are you sure you're just not worried about your old man, Barbara Gordon? And that's when the revelation comes out. Jim Gordon knows that his daughter is Batgirl, and he knows that she's Oracle. He was never supposed to know that. He's actually known for a long time. Batman's lips are pursed, right? He's like, oh. And then like Oracle's like, what? Nobody knows how to react to this, right? And so at the end of the day, like, they end up kind of having this sort of meeting with each other, at least Jim Gordon and Barbara do, and then ultimately you end up just having Jim Gordon and really Barbara giving him information saying, obviously, there's no way to talk you out of this, right? There's no way to convince you to not do this. Given the history between yourself and the Joker, this is very much a personal thing. So she gives him a phone and says, this will get you files to the Bat computer, but know that some of those files are locked. And so if you need access to those, you're gonna need a really, really good reason. I'm gonna call you once a day. If you don't answer during that day, I'm gonna have the phone self-destruct, right? He's on a very, very tight niche here, which is not designed to curtail his investigation to make sure he doesn't find anything incriminating on Batman when he's searching the computers. It's because it's her dad, and she's scared that her dad's gonna die. That's really what's kind of going on there. Now, as far as the Joker himself, in terms of his location in Belize, this is kind of a cool thing here. And the reason for that is because this is kind of a safe haven of sorts, right? Now, why it's a bit of a safe haven, again, we'll talk about here in a minute, because it's a really cool concept that DC's never really explored before, but you end up having this guy, Desmond, who kind of shows up here and basically says, look, like, the people you've killed in this building, you were not supposed to kill, right? There's guys you can hit, and then there's guys you can't hit. And these are one of those guys that you can't hit. And ultimately, the Joker's like, don't really care, man. It's kind of my thing, right, to kill people. It's just sort of what I do. And because of the fact that this is not a mess that's easily cleaned up, and because the powers that be are in this position where it's the Joker can't be doing stuff like this, ultimately, they ask him to leave. In response, he's like, but here's the kicker, though. There's going to be tons of people who are going to come looking for me here. And this is a perfect spot, right? This is an actual perfect spot to be. I can see everybody coming from a mile away. So I'll leave. I'll get on a plane and I'll take off. Get out of your hair. No less fuss. You can say you got everything resolved. The powers that be will just kind of leave you alone, and everything will be copacetic. But in the meantime, before I do, what I need is about 30 of your men to basically help me ward off everybody who's going to come here looking for me. Now, that's kind of the big question, is why are all these different people looking for Joker, and who are the powers that be? So we end up having Cressida, who basically goes back directly to, you know, the people who essentially employed her, only to find out that she's essentially working for the Court of Owls, and the Court of Owls are hunting the Joker. The girl who was in the great big huge tank in Santa Prisca, she puts the mask on, she's been exposed to Venom, she's the new Bane. Essentially, she's the daughter of Bane, which is kind of a crazy thing. And so ultimately you have Jim Gordon, who gets on the plane and basically heads out directly to Belize. And this is when you get this really cool kind of explanation that goes on here. Now, Barbara Gordon and you know, Cassandra Cain and like Stephanie Brown, and they're all looking into like Cressida, trying to figure out what's going on. It's not a significant plot point at this point in the story. It's just kind of a little background investigation that's happening. But one of the things that Gordon talks about here is a lot of the stuff he kind of picked up over the course of his time as a cop, but a lot of things that he also didn't know. And one of the things that he talks about here is that in the criminal underworld, there aren't necessarily rules, but there are norms, right? There are things that you just don't do, right? Like when you're a criminal, you don't take out other criminals unless they've done something to screw you over. And there's kind of this unwritten rule that's existed in comic books for years and years and years and years and years, right? It's always been that way. But this is one of those very rare instances, if there's ever really been an instance at all, where like a comic book publisher comes out and says, here's the reason why, right? Here's some in comic book logic for why that happens. But you look at things where like the Joker teams up with Two-Face, right? Or like the Green Goblin will team up with like Loki, or something along those lines in Marvel Comics. And you'll have instances where like villains will screw over other villains. And the question you always find yourself asking is, why don't those villains kill the villains that screwed them over? And we largely attributed that to the fact that it's just, well, I mean, the villain's gotta stay so you can tell comic book stories. Instead, the way this works is you don't hit other villains unless they've intentionally screwed you over. If you do, then whoever those friends and family of the villain that you killed are have every recourse to take you out, and nobody's going to offer you any safe haven. More so than that, the other part of the way this works is that there are these kind of networks, right? These safe havens. But back during World War II, you had these places that were for essentially German war criminals, but over the years they've been repurposed. And so the way this works is that if you're a criminal and you're looking to lie low, you can actually go to these places and you can kind of just stay there for a period of time. It's going to cost money, but you can stay there. And that is almost kind of for criminals and ran by criminals. But there are rules there, much like where you can't hit other guys, you can't take out other criminals, you can't just start tearing the place up, right? It's kind of a huge sign of disrespect, and ultimately you'll be ousted from those places. More so than that, the reason why the Joker's being allowed to stay at that base in Belize is kind of bragging rights. If they let the Joker stay there and the Joker follows the rules like he's supposed to, which the Joker is not going to do that, and the Joker eventually goes back to Gotham, then those organizations or criminals or people who were, in this particular instance, Desmond, the guy who runs it, can basically kind of advertise, hey, we kept the Joker saved from Batman, imagine what we can do for you, right? That's the kind of marketing they can put out there. And so you have Commissioner Gordon, who lands in Belize with some terrible Spanish, which is probably still better than mine, and starts talking to all these different people who are here. And he kind of gets his nose to the ground, he does a little bit of investigation, and the very least that he can get is that there is this place out there in the countryside where like criminals go whenever they're looking to lie low, but they don't say the name of it, right? Just for fear of the fact that there's eyes and ears everywhere. And if they start talking about this place, there's a good chance that they'll end up being killed because no one's supposed to know that it's there. But ultimately, Jim Gordon figures out where the location is. Now, not knowing the Joker's here, Jim Gordon goes knocking on the door saying, hey, I'm looking for somebody, right? He kind of hears this answer like, who is it? And he's like, I'm looking for someone. Like, I'm looking for an old friend. The door opens, and there's the Joker. And Joker's like, Jimbo, is that really you? Gordon immediately pulls the gun. It's the last person he was expecting here. The problem is he's surrounded by like 30 guys, right? So guns get dropped. Joker and Commissioner Gordon kind of start talking. While that's going on, you got a brother and sister murdering team that shows up here. Now, these two actually hail from a family in Texas. And that's why, like, literally, the daughter of Bane is hunting for the Joker. It's why this brother and sister are hunting for the Joker, because Bane was killed in the assault on Arkham Asylum. Scarecrow was killed in the assault on Arkham Asylum. The members of this family, of the brother and sister, were killed in the assault on Arkham Asylum. Specifically, one of their members of the family had actually taken the rat for the rest of the family, and then in turn were just serving life there. They kind of funneled money into Arkham to make sure they could serve the most comfortable life sentence possible, but it's basically just revenge. Everybody thinks the Joker did this, so everybody's coming for the Joker. And that's kind of the funny thing, because like literally Joker's like, hey man, you got here just in time, because everybody's coming here to kill me. So draw your guns, chap. It's gonna be a long night. And so what you end up getting here is this really cool moment where you have like the daughter of Bane, who's one of the first ones to come running up on the Joker and try to assault him. Now the Joker kind of dodges out of the way, but she gets through his guys so fast and then ultimately gets her hands on him with the intention of just like killing him. The problem with this is that as soon as she has her hands on the Joker, the twins arrive in a bus they hijacked and killed everybody on board, right? Just cut all their throats. So now they're like, we're gonna take out the Joker too. And then a little bit of beef kind of happens between them and the daughter of Bane, which is just sort of like, okay, so like who are we gonna kill? Like who's gonna kill the Joker? Because the daughter of Bane is like, no, he's coming back to Santa Prisca, so we can deal with him, we can execute him there for what he did to Bane. And then in turn, the twins are like, nope, he's coming back to Texas, so we can kill him, right? The Joker stops everything and says, hey guys, so let me know if you've heard this, right? What's white and black and red all over? He's like, it's the nerve gas canisters that I spent the last few days planting on the ground. I painted them that way, you know, for the joke. Beep. Boom! Like the whole place explodes, right? Like nerve gas canisters just go off everywhere, right? Everybody's dumped with enough nerve gas to knock them out cold. It's the most Joker thing ever, right? It makes perfect sense. Why not set this place up so that you can kind of have your own sort of backup plan, right? Just rig the whole place to detonate. And the reality of this, and that's what's so funny about this, the reality of this is he's violating the criminal norms all over the place, right? You would never do this in one of these facilities. But let's be honest with ourselves, what are they gonna do? The Joker is quite possibly the most dangerous criminal in the world, depending on who you're talking to. Some people might say Deathstroke, but what separates people like Deathstroke and Joker is the Joker is the most extreme sociopath, right? He's not a psychopath. He takes satisfaction in killing others. So he's an extreme sociopath, right? Like, that's his whole MO. And because of that, there's no real moral compass there outside of whatever it is he wants to do in order to achieve his own selfish goals. And most of those instances, it's getting Batman to come after him. But because of that, the Joker will kill whoever he can, whenever he can, if it means it's going to draw Batman out. Everybody in the world, every single person who lives in the world, as far as the Joker's concerned, with the exception of Batman, is just cannon fodder, toys to be used in the game that he plays. And that's what I think makes him the most dangerous criminal in the world. But ultimately, Commissioner Gordon wakes up. And when he does, of course, you end up seeing the Joker basically sewing the mouth shut of one of the guys. And he's kind of talking about how, like, this guy and his sister think they're super dangerous. They're not, right? He's like, you know, they're young kids. They don't understand like for us old crowd. See, we're old school. We know how to do things the right way. And that's one of the funny things here is because there's almost a kind of connection between these two, right? Because the Joker and Jim Gordon really are kind of old school, right? Like, we know how to get work done, right? These young kids, they're all pomp and circumstance, right? They're putting on a show, but when it all comes down to it, their guts are made of liquid just like everybody else, right? Like, they're weak, they're half measures. And that's kind of the funny thing because he's like, let's sit down and have a talk, Gordon, right? Old school man to old school man. The guys who knew how to do things right. He's like, I understand that you hate me, Gordon. I totally get it. I totally get you hate me. I've done terrible things to you, right? I destroyed any chance your son had of sanity. I shot your daughter through the spine. She's going to be paralyzed and for the rest of her life and has to have an implant that allows her to walk around, and her days are numbered, right? Like, I have turned your life upside down. And he says, you know, in looking at you, you're so intriguing because let's look at Batman, right? Batman's crazy. Batman's a lost ball in high weeds. The logic this man follows is, I'm going to dress as a bat and beat up criminals in the middle of the night. No sane human being would come to that logical conclusion. He's crazy. He's as crazy as I am. And if it wasn't for you grounding him, he would have lost his mind a long time ago. He'd be serving a life sentence at Arkham Asylum. Basically just the kid who lost his family and then went nuts. And that would be the story of him. And he says, but you, Gordon, you're a hypocrite, right? Like, you are a person who believes that fighting evil makes you good. Maybe good and evil do exist, but just because you're fighting evil does not mean that you're a good person. Evil fighting evil. So at the end of the day, tell me why you do this, right? Like, why don't you let Batman just kill everybody? Why don't you just take the reins off of him and just say, you know what, Bruce, do your thing. Why don't you just cut him off, right? And just let Batman go off the deep end so this quote-unquote war could be won. And the response of Gordon is, because this is a war that cannot be won. It's the inner thoughts of Commissioner Gordon, right? Like, this whole conversation is basically Gordon publicly admitting to the Joker that at the end of the day, Batman's actions really are not getting anything done. And that's what the Joker says, right? He's like, the whole purpose of Batman is he busts some criminals, he hands them over to the justice system puts them on trial, they go to Arkham Asylum, and they escape. That's how the system works, and it's working as intended. The system was not designed to eliminate criminals. The system was designed to enable criminals. Why? Because if the blue-collar criminals, the guys who rob banks and things like that, if they're making all this noise over here, then that's what the prosecutors focus on, because that's what people worry about. People don't worry about the guy who's committing fraud out there in the ether somewhere with a white-collar job. They worry about the person who's going to break into their home. It's a great distraction, right? Keep the people looking over there, and you do your thing over here. The system works exactly as intended. So, why do you play this game? Why do you do this, right? Like, why do you fight evil and believe you're the good guy in the first place, knowing that just because you fight evil does not automatically mean that you're good? And the response of Gordon is interesting here, right? He says, I don't know that I know how to be good, but I do know that I know how to fight evil, and that's good enough for me. And so that's kind of the funny thing, because he says, okay, here's what I want from you, right? Here's what I want from you, Gordon. I want you to figure out who's the person behind this, because I want you to tell me, I want you to run this investigation. I know that you've been sent here to kill me, and you're gonna go back to Gotham City, and you're gonna get 25 million smackaroos, and that's nice. But I want to know who it was that killed all those people in Arkham Asylum and then made it look like me. And the response of Gordon is, it was you. And that's when the Joker freaks. One of the important things to understand about the Joker, it's a matter of pride, right? Like, the Joker's one of these guys where he's like, yeah, man, I kill people all the time, but I want people to know it was me who did it. It's not as though I'm an assassin. I'm not somebody who sneaks in your house in the middle of the night, kills you, and then leaves. He's like, is there anything about me that would lead you to believe if I was going to unleash a Joker toxin in the entirety of Arkham, that it would kill people in their sleep? Is that really what you think I would do? No. I would unleash the Joker toxin in Arkham Asylum, and yes, it would kill everybody there, but I would love to know the satisfaction that the person at the other end of the hall was just laying there in terror as they heard each person in the cell next to them succumb to their laughter and then ultimately die, knowing that creeping fog of terror is making their way towards them. I find satisfaction in that, Gordon. I love that, Gordon. What in the world would make you think that I wouldn't do that? And that line of logic right there is absolutely sound. Because while the Joker is crazy as hell, right? As while he's absolutely nuts, that's exactly what he would do, right? The Joker leaves calling cards. The Joker wants people to know the things that he does. He's an extreme narcissist and sociopath. That's his whole MO. And so it's like, I want you to figure out what's going on, because there's something much bigger afoot going on here. Something much, much bigger that's taking place here. And he's like, I want you to see something, Gordon. You have this faith in a system, right? You have this belief, this little tiny spark in you that believes this judicial system, this criminal justice system that you work for is actually capable of doing the right thing. I want to remove that. I'm going to snap that out of you. And I want you to understand, Gordon, I'm going to break you in a way that stripping you down naked and showing pictures of what I did to your daughter will simply not do, right? I did that to you in an amusement park, right? I had you go through this roller coaster ride of hell where I showed you pictures of what I did to your daughter, of what my guys did to your daughter. I'm going to do far worse than that. Of course, that being a reference to the killing joke. But it's one of these things where he's like, in the meantime, go find out what's going on, right? Like, find out what's happening here. And so ultimately, he just kind of leaves Commissioner Gordon on his own. He heads to what's basically Europe, and then Commissioner Gordon is saved by the daughter of Bane. And as they had this, not really a lengthy conversation here, she recognizes him, of course, and says like, you're Bane from Gotham City, right? And he's like, yes. And she's like, go home, Gordon, right? You're already drowning in the darkness. Head back to the light while you still can, Gordon. This is a land of wolves, and you were not meant for this world, right? You were not meant for this kind of an environment. I understand that you have a desire to be. I understand that you want to do the right thing, but no, there's a big difference between people like you who do what they can and people like me who do what they have to. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with another episode of the Power Rangers, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Now, in the last video that we did, we basically had like all the Power Rangers turn into Green Rangers, essentially, right? That's one of the things we talked about. I mean, everybody except for Billy, right? You just kind of had like this crazy looking dragon Zord, more or less. They're called the Black Dragon. They came from a different dimension and was basically working with Rita Repulsa. And that Billy was captured, presumably due to his intelligence, and the rest of the Rangers, Tommy and Jason and Trini and Kimberly and them, basically were doing what they could against like this mystery guy. And so the result of this is a couple things go on. One, this Black Dragon guy had basically cut off the Power Rangers' access to the Morphin Grid, right? So they couldn't really do anything. The only exception was Tommy, because Tommy accessed the Morphin Grid essentially through like a back door, right? And so it couldn't necessarily be cut off by conventional means. And so in response to that, Tommy basically gave the rest of the Power Rangers his ability to tap into the Green Ranger energy, making them all Green Rangers at the expense of his ability to tap into it himself, right? So Tommy's not a Power Ranger at the moment, is basically what that means. And so what you end up getting here are a couple things going on. The first is that we got a kind of timeline from Rita Repulsa basically telling the world, if you don't submit to my rule, I'm going to conquer you, right? I'm just going to raise your cities and everything's going to come crashing to the ground. And of course, humanity chose to blow off Rita Repulsa and say like, we're not going to give into this whole thing, right? And so this basically had her, by way of the Black Dragon, who essentially controls the Zords now, since he controls the Morphin Grid, basically dispersing the Zords across major cities around the world to really just kind of make an example of them, right? Like, what happens if you do not submit to the rule of Rita Repulsa? The problem with this is suddenly the Power Rangers show up. Right? Jason shows up and all these guys, and it's kind of wild to see that they're basically Green Rangers, right? It's kind of strange to me. I know that over the course of the television history, different characters played different Power Rangers, different colors of Rangers, but still, man, it's just weird. I mean, it's cool. It's really, really cool, but it's just kind of strange to me to see like a person who's a Green Ranger, but has the whole like really helmet design of like the Red Ranger, right? So it's a little strange. But the fact that they can now access the Morphin Grid, even if it's doing it through Tommy's energy, basically now means they can get their Zords back. And so what you end up having is essentially all of them basically taking back all their Zords, right? Jason takes back the Tyrannosaurus, and Kimberly takes back the Pterodactyl, and Trini takes back the Saber-Tooth Tiger, so on. One of the things that also goes on here is you've got Billy, who's basically removed from the equation. Billy's not really part of this. Zach is of course, right? He's the Mastodon, but Billy's Triceratops is essentially being controlled now by the Black Dragon. And admittedly, the Triceratops is cool, but it's really just kind of a tank. Each one of the Zords kind of has their own capabilities, but the biggest issue you have with the Zords is that individually, they're not all that strong. The Tyrannosaurus is cool, the Dragon Zord is really cool in and of himself, but the problem is that they're designed to work in a situation where they're greater than the sum of their parts, hence the Megazord. And so when you have these individual Zords kind of facing off, where you have like the Triceratops facing off against the Tyrannosaurus and the Saber-Tooth Tiger and the Pterodactyl and the Mastodon, there's not a whole lot it can do. The whole situation is complicated even further when Tommy reveals that he still has access to the Dragon Zord, albeit he's not really a Ranger, so he can't really pilot it in the traditional sense. Instead, he's using his Dragon Dagger, right? His flute. He's singing songs and winning the day. But ultimately, it's one of these things where this Black Dragon guy is essentially cornered, right? He's got like a Triceratops at his disposal, and that kind of seems to be it. And so what you end up getting is this kind of transition where you pick up with Billy and Goldar, and this is why I say the way Goldar's handled here is amazing, because normally Goldar's is kind of a throwaway guy, you know? It's it's Goldar, right? He was kind of a goof in the TV show. In the comic, he's amazing. And there's this really cool situation where because they're in the dark dimension, that's basically controlled by Goldar, right? I mean, that's really what this is. Goldar kind of decides what does and doesn't go on there. And that's kind of the crazy thing is because in this conversation that they're having, Billy is largely observing everything that's going on, right? In terms of like this kind of viewing sphere, more or less, just sort of observing every single thing that's happening. And there's a kind of agreement, right, between him and Goldar, where it's kind of like, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of this Black Dragon guy. Like, what do you think? And Goldar's like, no, I don't really like him either, right? Like, I'm not a huge fan of this guy. This guy came up out of nowhere and basically told Rita Repulsa he could help her do what I could not. Hence the reason why I'm imprisoned here in the dark dimension. So like, I kind of see this guy as a bigger issue. And that's when Billy's kind of like, so you don't know anything about this guy? And he's like, no, we don't know anything about him. All we know is like his voice came from beyond, right? Some place beyond the pines, I don't know. And then in turn, Rita Repulsa decided to work with him. And that's when it's kind of like, okay, so Goldar kind of hits at this idea, like he's a lot more observant than they give him credit for. And that's the cool, that's why I like the way he's done in the comics, right? I mean, a lot of you guys who are my age, right? I'm 37 years old. A lot of you guys who are my age who grew up with the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Goldar was a goof. And then when you look at this, it's kind of like, I mean, no, he's really not. Like he's very, very observant. And he's like, I don't think that's his true form. And when Billy's like, what are you talking about? He's like, he shrinks and he grows at will. His armor basically builds around him. So I don't know if he's in there. I don't know if he's somewhere else, but whatever it is, that's not actually him. And that's cool. That's a huge piece of information because what it does is it leads Billy on this kind of trail where he's like, hold on, he's like, freeze that. He's like, zoom in on this guy's neck. And that's when he realizes there's an access hatch there, right? This is a Zord, right? That's all it is. Like, it's a giant Zord. I mean, sure, it's insanely advanced. It grows, it shrinks. It seems to have capabilities and different things like that, technologies that the Zords here in I guess, the main Power Rangers universe doesn't necessarily have. But at the end of the day, it's still a Zord. And if there's any one thing we've learned about the Zords and when it comes to the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, they seem to run on some form of electricity. Billy's like, okay, can you get out of here? And Goldar's like, I mean, I control the dark dimension. And he's like, but I mean, can you get out of here? He's like, no, I'm imprisoned here by Rita Repulsa. Now, this is an interesting thing. This changes the way that you see Goldar's character. Because it's one thing to see Goldar imprisoned in the dark dimension, and it's another to know that he keeps himself there, right? Out of loyalty for Rita Repulsa. But the cool thing here is Billy's like, okay, so I get you're gonna stay here because you feel honor bound to serve out your punishment, you know, as to make amends for your failures, your past transgressions, and disappointing Rita Repulsa. But like, can you get me out of here though? And Goldar's like, I mean, I guess I could, but like, why would I? And Billy makes this amazing case. He's like, you know what? I think you're right. He's like, I think that guy's form is not his actual form. I don't think that person, that Black Dragon, is what they claim to be. Sure, like there's somebody who's capable and powerful, but they're not revealing all their cards. They still have an ace up their sleeve somewhere. He's like, if it really does have an access hatch, then it's mechanical. And if it is mechanical, who knows machines better than me, right? Like, I'm the best person suited to figure out how to take this guy down. And so, get me out of here, right? Get me out of here, get me back there. I can get this guy defeated, done, out of the picture, and clear the path for you to get back into the good graces of Rita Repulsa. That right there is a super convincing argument. That's one of the things that I love about this, right? In the old Power Rangers TV show, Billy was the brains, but back in the 90s, it was all about stereotypes, right? And so, when you had a character like Billy, who was the brains of the operation, it was one of those things where he's like, he's the brain, he's the nerd, he's the goof, right? And like, that's all he's gonna be. In this, there's a kind of suave and almost a little bit of you know, espionage type attitude to Billy, right? Which is pretty cool. And that's why I love the way Billy's done here, because ultimately Goldar's like enemies of our enemies, and Billy's like enemies of our enemies. So it's like, cool. So he opens a portal, Billy gets out, right? And as soon as he gets there, he's like, okay, so here's the thing. That Black Dragon is fully mechanical. I don't know exactly what's going on here, but I do know it's mechanical. And Tommy's like, what are you talking about? He's like, it's basically a Zord, man. So like, it's got an access hatch. If we can get in the access hatch of that thing, and we can get inside, we can find his power source, we can shut it down, right? We can end this thing. And so that's when Tommy's like, okay, cool, let's do this, right? The Power Rangers are getting wrecked, right? Everybody else, they're just getting crushed by this Black Dragon guy, right? So at the end of the day, I mean, they're just a distraction, right? That's why you don't really see them. They're a background thing, right? Just clinging on for dear life. Like, literally, like, Jason's like, Trini, on your six, watch out before... Like, it's one of these things where, like, they're just getting crushed. Which is admittedly kind of cool. You know, it's kind of cool. I don't know about you guys, but I do kind of like seeing heroes get wrecked by villains. I don't know why. I feel like maybe it provides more credibility to the villains. I'm not really sure. Especially if it's like a foreign villain you haven't seen before. Ultimately, they break into the Zord, and as soon as they get in there, Billy's like, okay, so he accesses his mainframe and is like, there's a power source here. And ultimately, once they get their hands on it, they shut it down. And as soon as they do, that Zord comes crashing down. Now, there's a problem when that happens. it starts to shrink. And as the Zord begins to shrink, of course you've got Billy in them, they don't shrink, which means it's literally crushing them, like gonna destroy them eventually. And so what ends up happening here is that as the Zord begins to shrink down, the rest of the Rangers try to get there in time, and they don't. In response, the Zord just kind of like, there's this a giant amass of just green energy that's essentially a teleportation. It looks like an explosion, but Billy and Tommy are effectively yanked away. And that's when you have Trini, who's kind of going through the remnants of this rubble, and it's like, hey, a lot of this stuff looks familiar, man. Like, I know this thing was called a black dragon, but like, if it's a Zord, then like, I know some of these parts, right? Like, these are parts from the Dragon Zord. That's what these things are for. Like, they're I don't know what this is. I don't know what's going on here, but this thing looks like a Dragon Zord that was repurposed, right? Switch over to Rita Repulsa. And Rita's just kind of like, okay, so like, the Rangers have basically recovered your body. And she's like, how is that? Like, how are you talking to me if they recovered your body? He's like, because I was never there, right? Like, the Black Dragon was basically a thing operating on my behalf out there. It's just a vessel from my dimension, but I was never actually there, which is kind of crazy, because the question you have to ask yourself is, if the Power Rangers with their Zords and everything struggled that much against the Black Dragon, what chance do they have against this guy? This is made even more complicated by the fact that he says, I know exactly where Billy and Tommy have been teleported to. They've been teleported to my dimension. They've been teleported to my world, and they have no idea what they're in for. This is an alternate reality version of the Power Rangers, who is the White and the Green Ranger combined. Those of you guys who know what's going on, no spoilers. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace. Did you guys know that Mighty Morphin Power Rangers has a comic book? And it's amazing. It's so cool. They have like this character named Lord Draken, and like there's, dude, this story, man, it's good, man. It's really, really good. Okay, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. I grew up on Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. And I will say, until the end of time, that Green with Envy is the best little mini-series in the Power Rangers TV show ever, right? Like, literally, the Green Ranger beat the crap out of all the other Power Rangers. Here's the whole thing behind this, right? All this really focuses on Tommy, at least this first video that we're doing here. Right? Focus on the Green Ranger, this focuses on Tommy, right? So here's a crazy thing. I mean, there's a much bigger plot going on behind this whole thing. But this is kind of like a bit of a view, or almost kind of a concept or an idea, that if Tommy stayed under the spell of Rita Repulsa when he was originally introduced as the Green Ranger, that he would have done exactly what we saw him do in Green with Envy. He would have crushed the Power Rangers, rightfully so, because he's the Green Ranger, and all the Power Rangers suck compared to the Green Ranger. So like we would have seen that happen, right? And that's kind of what you see play out here. But what you end up doing is actually kind of jumping to reality in the moment. Now, this immediately follows, I wouldn't say immediately, I'd say within like a time period, right? It's like a few weeks, essentially. But it basically follows the whole idea of Tommy basically being freed from the influence of Rita Repulsa, and then being inducted full on into the Power Rangers. And so you kind of have him hanging out with Jason, right? Which makes sense, right? Jason and Tommy were like the two guys. Like, we kind of know what's going on with these two dudes. But one of the things that kind of goes on here is that in the aftermath of Rita's involvement with Tommy, that Tommy gets these hallucinations with Rita Repulsa, where she just kind of pops up and she'll just sort of influence him, talk to him, right? Almost kind of tear him down. And that's a kind of mainstay of the character, right? Of Tommy himself, is that he's always dealing with this idea from like these Rita Repulsa visions that like she's telling him like, you're not good enough, right? Without me, you'll never really be a good ranger, right? You'll never be up to your full potential or anything along those lines. It really is like all of this self-doubt kind of given form in Rita Repulsa. And so following that, what you actually end up getting, while they have their school stuff, whatever, nobody cares about the Power Rangers when they were in school, right? Nobody cares. I remember watching that show, and it was like, okay, now we're gonna switch over to the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers when they're in school, like they're in class, and they're hanging out doing math. And I was like, I don't care. I wanna see them fight like the buddies, man. Like, action boy now, action girl now. It was a cool song from a terrible movie, but the whole thing about this is that you kind of have this moment where they all basically band together, right? It's Morphin time. You guys know the whole thing. And they kind of jump into the fray against like this massive monster that's basically just ripping the place up. And what you end up getting is kind of this cool moment where you have like the Dragon Zord who's called in, you've got the other Zords who call in, they form into the Megazord, the Power Rangers kind of do their thing. Right? The big caveat to this is that while all that's happening, Tommy's Zord is not functioning the way that it's supposed to. It's not responding to his command, which is a huge deal, right? Like when you literally got a monster that's the size of a skyscraper just ripping it down apart, and you need like all the Rangers to respond to it, it's all got to be able to operate at peak efficiency. And it's one of these things where like the weak link in the chain will lead to the ruin of all. And so that's when things really kind of become hairy, and they start asking questions. What's going on with Tommy? And the initial response here from Tommy is, well, my Dragon Zord just froze, right? Billy or whoever it is, somebody take a look at it, let me know what's going on. And that's kind of the crazy thing is Zordon chimes in and says, okay, but like it doesn't necessarily work that way, right? That when it comes to the Zords that you guys wield, that the Zords really kind of require a bit of involvement on your behalf. They have to be able to trust you. Now Zordon kind of chimes in and he actually brings into this whole thing. If you guys recall in the original series in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the original TV show back in the day, that there wasn't a whole lot known about the Green Ranger, right? The Green Ranger coin, the whole thing that gave Tommy his powers, that he was essentially something that was almost unique to Rita Repulsa. And Zordon didn't have a lot of knowledge about it. Her involvement with the Dragon Zord is extensive, and it's one of the things that he says. But for the most part, he can't really offer a lot of options here. It'd be different if it was the Red Ranger, or the Blue Ranger, or the Yellow Ranger, or the Pink Ranger, or even the Black Ranger. It'd be different if that was the case because Zordon can have a lot more influence there because you guys know the whole thing between Zordon and the Rangers. But when it comes to the Green Ranger, there's as many unanswered questions as there are answered questions. And so not having a full totality of the understanding of what's going on here really presents a few complications. The other part to this is that Rita is constantly trying to find a way to sort of expand her power. But one of the things that's going on here with this meeting between Rita Repulsa and Scorpina is Scorpina had kind of been sent on a mission by Rita. And what you kind of have here is what's called a Chaos Crystal. And so what she's basically done here is acquired a crystal from Rita Repulsa. That's something I want you guys to keep in the back of your head because that's incredibly important. But from there, you basically jump to Vulcan's skull. What you kind of have here is really this statement that's offered by Jason in regards to like people's perception of the Green Ranger. And it's one of these things where it's essentially known at this point the Green Ranger single-handedly dismantled the other Rangers. And now that he's fighting alongside them, there's a lot of concern and a lot of worry. Like, should we be worried about a former villain turned hero who's fighting alongside the Rangers? Is it a ruse? Something along those lines? And the response that Jason kind of offers here, again, sort of keeping his identity as a Ranger secret, is, well, if the Rangers trust him, we should trust him too. It's kind of an interesting thing because what you're going to notice going on here is that in a lot of ways, there's a lot of distrust when it comes to Tommy. But you even have these kind of discussions that are going on among the other Rangers when Tommy's not there, which is, I mean, can we really trust him? Right? I mean, this guy was seemingly picked out of nowhere by Rita Repulsa, dropped into our laps, beat us within an inch of our lives, destroyed pretty much the entire base of Zordon and Alpha 5. Like, literally, if it hadn't been for this guy, we never would have really known we could beat the beast. You know what I mean? Like you guys remember that. You guys remember Green with Envy, right? I mean, he trashed them. He trashed the Rangers. It was the coolest thing. But that's kind of the question we're left asking, right? Like, this guy was a henchman of Rita Repulsa. Can we really trust him? Because we still don't really know anything about him. Like, we still don't really know. And that's one of the kind of conversations that happens between Zach and Jason. Is Zach is just kind of like, hey man, like, did you really believe the stuff that you were telling like Vulcan Skull on that? He's like, what are you talking about? Like, I mean, this idea that like Zordon never even really asked us how we felt about bringing Tommy on board. He just brought him on board as Ranger. But in all honesty, and that's one of the things where Jason kind of just deviates to the wisdom of Zordon. It's almost X-Men-esque in that way, right? Like Cyclops' inherent belief that Xavier knows what he's doing and he's always right turned out to be wrong, and that's why Cyclops defected. It's kind of the same way when you have like Jason and Zordon, right? That Jason trusts Zordon. He trusts the experience and wisdom of Zordon, and he kind of leans into that and says, well, Zordon didn't really know anything about us, right? We were teenage kids with attitudes, right? I mean, that's basically what we were. And he trusted that we could be effective as Rangers, and so why can't we trust him when it comes to Tommy? But Jason has reservations, man. And so what you end up doing is kind of switching to this bit of a moment here where you have like all these putties in like this worn down city, a giant monster just leveling everything in sight, just ripping it all to pieces. And so you have Tommy who's tasked with this role to basically take these people to safety, right? These innocent individuals to safety. The problem is that as he does that, he ends up leading them down what is in effect a trap, right? It's essentially this kind of hallway or this corridor where they're just surrounded by putties. While all that's going on, he's got Rita Repulsa whispering in his ear, telling him, right, it won't be enough, it's never enough, right? Like you led these people to this place, you failed when they counted on you, like all that kind of stuff. Like, you're never going to be an effective Ranger. Only for us to find out it's a training simulator. Now this is incredibly cool, right? Because at this point, I would even say Zordon is a little weary about Tommy. But the thing about this is that the training simulators are not really just for Tommy, right? It's not one of these things where it's like, hey man, we don't really trust you, dude, so like from now on, you're just going to be hanging out in the simulator and we'll just see how you respond. Instead, the simulator is designed to test them as Rangers, to really kind of force them into these positions where they have to face mortality. And this particular simulation focuses on the idea of a no-win situation, right? It's the coming off the roof for the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, right? A no-win scenario. Instead of Tommy hacking the system and cheating, like Captain Kirk did in Star Trek. He chose what he thought was the best decision. The reality is that had he chosen the other road, he actually would have led them directly into the face of the monster. But the whole gist of this, and the reason why it's so important is because there are times when, as a ranger, you are going to have to face certain defeat, right? You are going to have to face the fact that you might die. And the whole idea behind the simulator is to, one, understand you're not going to make the perfect choice every single time. And two, when that happens, you're going to have to be able to face the consequences of it. You're going to have to deal with it as best you can. It was really a moral fortitude test, and really a kind of courage test for Tommy. What was he going to do in the face of disaster? Was he just going to panic and cry? Was he going to just, keep fighting for as long as he could? And he responded in seemingly the best way he could. The other part of that is you end up having Trini and Billy who really just kind of analyze the whole thing, right? They analyze the dragon sword to figure out what's going on and all that kind of good stuff. So not a whole lot going there. Billy does his usual thing where he's like, I don't know if I'm really cut out to be a ranger. People don't really like me all that much, and it's like, Billy, get it together, man. Like, you're a ranger, dude. Come on. Like, I mean, see, I personally couldn't be a Power Ranger, man, because I'd be using that to get laid like all the time. I'd just like show up in my Power Ranger gear and just be like, hey, girl. The funny thing about this is that once Tommy gets back to his place, he's immediately met by the arrival of Scorpina. Now, that's kind of the crazy thing here is because Tommy makes the right move, just like that, and actually teleports Scorpina away. Now, this is one of the big issues that Tommy deals with here. And the reason why is because as soon as he and Scorpina are in this field by themselves, he morphs into the Green Ranger and then goes to fight Scorpina. Notice here, he does not contact the other Rangers, and that's a big problem. Because whenever it is that you're a Power Ranger, you're inherently a team, right? Like, you fight as a team, you do your thing, you hang out as a team. That's one of the things that was kind of built in and really established when it came to the Rangers. I mean, they did everything together, right? Like, they lunched together at what was maybe the cool kids table, I don't really know, right? But like, they ate their food together, they hung out together, they would like go shopping and stuff like that together. And even if it wasn't like the whole group, it'd be like Kimberly and Trini, right? Or like Jason and Zach, or like Billy, Jason, and Zach, or something along those lines. But like, they would all go and do stuff seemingly in some form or fashion as a team. Tommy is very much isolated and very much a loner. And that's a very important thing for his character, because all he really knows in relation to the Rangers is, for the most part, betrayal, right? I mean, granted, he was being manipulated and controlled by Rita Repulsa at the time, but the reality of this is that the Rangers still don't fully trust him. And so it is kind of on him to try to demonstrate that he is a trustworthy individual. And doing things like this, right, like just jumping into a fight with one of Rita's, really one of her most dangerous henchmen, is a pretty big thing when you're not calling the other Rangers in, right? I can deal with it on my own. I don't need you guys. And while there is something to be said about having the courage to face your struggles on your own, there's a big difference between doing it because you have to and doing it because you choose to. And Tommy is choosing to ignore his teammates here and do this on his own. And that's kind of the crazy thing, is because you end up having this great big huge thing where like putties are called in and they end up facing off against all the putties and so on and so forth. But then Rita basically chimes in. You kind of jump over to her for a second, and the idea of Scorpina being here is twofold. First and foremost, if at all possible, get the power coin away from Tommy, right? Like, get it from him and then bring it back to Rita. That's the best alternative. That's like the main mission here. But shy of being able to do that, get Tommy to expend as much of his energy as possible, because the crystal that Rita has is powered by it. Like, literally, as he fights, it powers the crystal. And that's kind of the subversive motive here, right? It's the one thing that's kind of not being made aware of, right? I mean, you have Scorpina who's like, give me the power coin, that kind of thing, but she's not really saying like, keep on fighting, because then you'll expend your energy, and then we'll be able to power some crystal that we made somewhere. But the rest of the Rangers seemingly jump in here, right? You have these other Rangers who kind of jump in, right? The Red Ranger, the Pink Ranger, right? They all just kind of jump in, as best they can, and it's cool to see them all kind of teaming up. But at the end of the day, like, Rita is still chiming in to Tommy, right? She's still talking to Tommy, still being kind of subversive and offering these words that really sort of tear him down, that kind of a thing. The other question that kind of comes here, really comes from the other Rangers, is why didn't you get a hold of us? And the whole thing about Tommy is, no, I was blindsided, okay? Like, she showed up in my house. What was I gonna do? Like, I just teleported her away, and that was basically it. But again, the role of the Rangers is to be able to think fast, to be able to analyze the situation and leave emotion out of it. And Tommy basically seems to lack that ability. That's really what seems to be going on here. He's very much a loner, very much doing his own thing. He's not really used to operating as a team, and it's showing itself here. And so the result of all this is that as Rita keeps chiming in and really kind of bothering Tommy, even while he's there with the rest of the Rangers in their base of operations, that ultimately it gets the better of him, and he seemingly just passes out. And so what he ends up having here, or at least what he ends up experiencing, are almost kind of like these visions and hallucinations. Now, some of these are really more like premonitions, more so than hallucinations or anything else. But the thing about this is that once Tommy kind of comes to, the dream that he had is that he'd basically been taken home by the Rangers and dropped off at his house. And his mom's like, oh, you know, it's okay, and it's cool, you have such great friends. And Power Rangers even, wow. And then it just kind of blows Tommy away. It's like, you're not supposed to know that, right? You're not supposed to know. And then of course she rips her face off, and it turns out it's Rita Repulsa who's still screwing with Tommy's head. And that's kind of the crazy thing about that, is because you jump to Rita herself, and that's when she says, we really kind of get this explanation where it's, well, Tommy's not necessarily under her direct spell, that seemingly the powers he possesses come from Rita. But by whatever manner and whatever means, there's still a bridge there. And so she's seemingly still able to manipulate and to kind of influence Tommy. Now again, a lot of that is just the idea of always trying to get him to come back, always trying to reel Tommy back in again. But the important thing here is she basically kind of tells Scorpina, the whole idea is that as Tommy continued to fight against you and against whoever it is he's facing off against now, the green chaos energy that he emits will basically fuel this crystal. And at the end of the day, we'll be able to open a port, which is exactly what they've been shooting for. And there's a reason why they're looking to open this portal, because it's a great concept. They say it's a great idea. But what they end up doing here is, in order to force Tommy to expend even more energy as much as they possibly can, they come up with this idea to basically create what is in effect a forged dagger or forged key that will allow them to use the Dragon's Word. Not only that, you have Trini, who actually runs a kind of mental scan on Tommy. The problem is that in the middle of this mental scan, suddenly, like, he experiences this vision where the Dragon's Word goes nuts and just destroys the entirety of their base of operations and everything, right? Like, there's nothing they can do. Like, it all just gets ripped apart. The Rangers and the whole 9 yards. And then suddenly Tommy comes to, right? Like, Tommy just wakes up. And that's kind of the crazy thing, is because when Trini goes to check the energy scan of Tommy, she comes to the realization something else is going on. And so what ends up happening is she actually calls all the Rangers back to their base of operations, and then she presents it with the information, right? And she says, okay, so this is when Jason got his body scan, right? His mind and body scan, essentially his energy signature, right? A power scan, as they call it. This is what he looks like, right? This is what Tommy looks like. Somebody is messing with Tommy's powers. Somebody is influencing Tommy. And they don't know that Rita's the one who's doing this. And so when the question is like, okay, like, can it be somebody like Rita? Like, can somebody be doing this? I mean, that's the immediate thought, right? She's the one who basically created him as a Green Ranger. Why wouldn't she be the one who's involved? And when they kind of ask him, like, hey man, like, have you been in contact with Rita? Is that kind of what's going on, man? Tommy spills the beans and says, initially it started off as flashes, right? In the corner of my eye, I'd see a blip of Rita Repulsa over there, or I might see her off in the distance or something like that. But the more things went on, the more I began to see her regularly. And then the more I began to experience her talking to me, tearing me down, telling me all these things, basically taking all these feelings that I had about myself and bringing them into the surface, and really saddling him up and forcing him, really kind of stripping away the confidence that he has in what he's capable of. Now, when the most obvious question is asked, why didn't you tell us? The response of Tommy is, I was trying to handle it. But this is a really important thing to understand here. One of the big differences between Tommy and the other Rangers is all the other Rangers, quote unquote, grew up with this, for lack of a better word. They didn't really grow up together in the traditional sense, but it's really more of a thing of like, they all became Rangers at the same time. So they were discovering their powers, and it really forced them to bond in a way that Tommy just hasn't done yet. Right? I mean, they were learning what their Ranger powers were. They've got their own home lives, their own struggles, and they learned quite quickly that in order to operate at peak efficiency as the Power Rangers, they had to be in unison, right? Mind, body, and spirit. They had to operate in that way. And so a lot of what would normally be those social hierarchies that exist among, high school kids, a lot of those things that would be those kind of mental barriers to sort of keep them from revealing those parts of themselves, how they feel, or their struggles or family lives, those were eliminated very fast. And so there was a very strong closeness that was built between all the other members of the Power Rangers. Tommy is just here. And so now that they don't really trust him, because when they first met him, he just trashed them all, rightfully so, because the Green Ranger is better than all the other Power Rangers. When that happened, it built a lot of mistrust. So much has happened so fast that there really hasn't been a chance for anybody to kind of catch their breath and figure out what's going on. Not only that, you've also got Scorpina, who manages to use the Forged Dagger to actually take control of the Dragon's Horde and then start, like, trashing the town, right? Like, just ripping everything up. Now, the other Rangers respond and actually start dragging it back into the water, but that's when, like, another monster is created by Rita, which offers as a distraction to basically keep the Power Rangers from focusing on the Dragon's Horde. Enter Tommy in one of his coolest moments here. The what you end up getting is this whole situation where Tommy, who's more or less being kept away from the other Rangers, and kept back in those operations, kind of watching everything unfold, is doing so because, for the most part, as he's facing these hallucinations, he consistently get the better of him. And so you have this really great moment where this kind of personality of Rita Repulsa, as his influencer, is saying to him, they were always going to find out you can only fake it for so long that you are a normal person, but in the end, you're no hero. Right? You're not a hero like the other Power Rangers. You're the villain. You're right? Like, that's it. Like, you were never going to be anything great. And ultimately, Tommy overcomes it. Says, no. Like, I used to believe you were real. I used to think that you were actually tangible. But no, you're just all my self-doubt. Like, you're all the self-doubt that I have. My insecurity that's wrapped up through all my dragon powers. Like, you are everything that I dislike about myself. But in the end, you're still just me. This is Tommy coming to grips with himself. And if only it were so easy for us as people to see some tangible manifestation of every negative emotion we have about ourselves and then overcome it so easily, right? If only that were the case, life would be so much easier. If only it was possible for us to just have some physical version we could just pump. What Tommy does. And as he comes to terms with that, and as he starts to realize, no, right, I am capable of being a hero. I was under Rita Report's spell when I did all these terrible things. But what the Rangers need right now is not some guy who's struggling with self-doubt. They don't need some guy who lacks confidence in his capabilities. They need the Green Ranger. They need a guy who's going to defy all the odds and even break the rules if it means saving your life. And that's what happens with Zordon. Zordon's like, no, right? We can't really trust that you've got past these hallucinations. And the response to Tommy is, dude, I don't care, man. Like, I don't really care about your stupid rules, you blue floating head. Like, I don't really care about that. It's morphin' time, right? He just, dude, man, I'm sorry, I'm so excited, people. It is an exciting story, right? It's cool. It's a really cool moment here, right? Guy jumps up, like, grabs the dagger, man, starts, and that's the thing, man. Let me tell you something, man. When all these days when I was watching Power Rangers, that's when you knew shit was about to pop off, right? Like, it's just like, I don't know, like, you don't even know Tommy's there, right? It's just like things are popping off and things are getting kind of nuts, you know, and it's like, oh, Tommy's coming, man! Like, Tommy's gonna save the day, you know, and like, here comes the Dragon Zord, and the day gets saved. It was always kind of a cool thing, right? And so, literally, he basically seizes control of his Dragon Zord again. He basically fights off Scorpina, right? Manages to defeat her, again, expelling a little bit more energy here. But once he basically comes out on top, and once he's able to basically destroy the fake dagger that she had, and then replace it with his real one, then that gives him control of his Dragon Zord again, right? And between the two of them and the Megazord, you know, defeating the giant monster, then that's basically it, right? The problem is, once they get back into the base of operations, Jason lets Tommy have it, right? He's just like, I don't know how much more clear I could have been. I appreciate that you wanted to just break the rules and go out in the field to save us from this imminent danger. I really do appreciate that, but understand, we can't trust you, man. Like, we don't, like, you tried to destroy us when we were under the spell of Rita, and you almost did. And then now that you're not under the spell of Rita, you were thrown onto the Power Rangers team. We didn't have a choice of whether you were going to be here or not. Then you were hallucinating, and you were seeing shit. Like, and what? We can't, there's nothing about you that we can trust right now. But at the end of the day, he's just kind of like, no, right? Like, that's it. Like, this is it, right? I mean, either you have me here or you don't. But I'm not playing this game of, like, trying to bounce between your rules and your standards and all that kind of stuff. That's not how this works, man. I just saved your lives. So if you guys have a problem with that, then, like, you end up having this kind of situation where Zach gives him, you know, ends up giving him brief, and it's just kind of like, you know, when he's like, dude, like, let go of me, he's like, well, what are you going to do? You're going to go all evil Green Ranger? And that's enough right there, right? That's enough of it right there. Because the whole time they're there, Scorpina's tied to a chair. She's watching all this unfold, and then something catches her eye. As Tommy gets more and more angry, as he keeps going on and on and on, and even starts to get into a fight with Jason, the crystal in that dagger is glowing, right? It's glowing. It's charging up. It's powering up. And ultimately, when Tommy goes into attack Jason, that's all it needs, right? Like, the thing is fully charged. Literally, a portal rips open and just blows out the side of the entire base of operations. And in what is probably the entrance of the greatest character ever in the history of Power Rangers, in the history of the whole Power Rangers mythos, a Black Dragon Zord appears, right? And it's just like, what's going on, Power Rangers? I've been looking forward to destroying all of you for a long time. Who wants to go first? With that being said, guys, I'm going to bring this to an end. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know if you want to see more, and I will catch you all later. Peace.
Where are my potions?
Phrase about Carol Danvers saying that she has some ideas for the future, but again, we don't really know what this means. But again, this story was kind of rushed in a lot of different ways, especially when it came to the ending. It really does reflect the notion that it was a story written for the purpose of just kind of being a cash grab on the main Civil War movie that was coming out, Captain America Civil War. But okay, so as a general rule, when it comes to comic books, especially Marvel's side, I really prefer more of like the darker and edgier stories. Stories like Champions, I absolutely love if you can look past all the social justice warrior stuff. It's actually a really good story. It's just sometimes it just kind of gets its own way. But Infamous Iron Man this story is going to be a perfect demonstration of what happens when Brian Michael Bendis cares about what he's writing. Because this story is amazing. It's so good. Now, The weird thing here is that Bendis split it up in an odd way. Most of the comic books are done, usually have just story arcs. A lot of times those story arcs will be collected in trade form, where you'll see like Infamous Iron Man Volume 1 or something along those lines. Now, for the sake of my channel, I just split everything up on story arcs and just call it volumes. That way it's easier to follow. It doesn't necessarily mean that what you see listed as a volume on my channel will be a volume on Amazon, but it does mean that it makes it easier for you to follow the story. So the weird thing is that Infamous Iron Man is actually not an issue long, but Bendis and Marvel split it into 6 and 3. So the first story arc is 6 issues, the second story arc is 3, and then presumably it'll come to an end. But the cool thing about this is that what this does is this picks up previously in the history of Marvel Comics with regards to the Cabal. Now, the Cabal was an organization that, or at least as it seemed to exist here, was around the days of Dark Reign. So this, of course, is when Norman Osborn had basically taken control of S.H.I.E.L.D. from Tony Stark after Stark was ousted and Norman Osborn was put in his place as director, but it was also around the time that Osborn began to form Hammer. But the Cabal is a general name given to various groups who have existed throughout Marvel Comics that some of the purposes acting like little organizations. It's not like, the Cabal is a singular faction. It's a name that can be used at any point in time. For example, Thanos had his Cabal during timelines. One was Thanos, the Black Order, and Namor the Submariner. Which, by the way, we will cover the Black Order. We'll probably go through all that stuff. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to time things so that between the time the first Infinity War movie comes out and the second Infinity War movie comes out, we're covering all the Thanos cosmology, eventually leading up to like Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers and all that kind of stuff. Because yes, I will finish that. For those of you guys who are asking, there's just other amazing stories that I want to tell. The fact remains here that this is basically Bendis kind of showing us who Doctor Doom used to be. And it's kind of interesting because it's almost like we don't really need a reminder. It's like we know who Doctor Doom is. Like we know what Doctor Doom is about, but it doesn't hurt. And it's cool because it's not like some grandiose display of power or something like that. What it actually does is it focuses on an interaction between the Hood, Parker Robbins, and Doctor Doom. Now, Parker Robbins is an interesting situation in Marvel Comics. And the reason why I say that is because of the fact that he's basically this guy who has access to like a lot of weapons and stuff like that. And he's more akin to like the Kingpin than anything else. But he's also been extremely dangerous and powerful. For example, he has accessed and harnessed the powers of the Infinity Gems. So that shows you how capable he is. And it's just an instance where he's been able to attain absolute power for himself on more than one occasion. Not only that, he's very good at being a demagogue, which is to say, rallying people to his side and positioning himself as this sort of warlord. The interaction between Parker Robbins and Doctor Doom here is basically a discussion about how Parker Robbins is asking questions that he has no business asking, in the sense that he basically asked Doom about his history. Is it true you gained the power of the Beyonder, way back in the original Secret Wars event? Because keep in mind, Doom's had the power of the Beyonder before. That was the first Secret Wars story, and then he lost it, and then, so on and so forth. But, basically Parker Robbins begins asking him about the various powers that he's had. Now, Parker Robbins actually also makes reference to a story called Triumph and Torment, I think it is. And the way this works, this is actually going to be a very important part of the story, and we'll delve into this a little bit more as we go on. But the way this works is basically it was Doctor Strange and Doctor Doom freeing the mother of Doctor Doom himself. Now, again, we'll get to that as we get further into this story, but the fact remains here that because of the fact that Parker Robbins is just asking too many questions, Doom basically just whisks him away using his powers. And it's kind of funny to see, because everybody's reaction is like, did you kill him? And Doom's like, no, I didn't kill him. I just whisked him away. But that's really how these cabals work, in the sense that there's this kind of unwritten rule that you don't go prodding when prodding isn't necessary. People don't start asking Emma Frost about her personal life. They don't start asking Namor the Submariner about what it means to be king. They don't ask Loki why he's a chick. And you do not ask Doctor Doom about his mom. And so because of this, it kind of jumps back to the modern day right now. Now, with regards to this little bit, what I want to do is I want to kind of sidetrack from this story for a quick second, and I want to refresh some people, or at the very least get some people caught up who are not familiar with what's going on with Doctor Doom in Marvel Comics right now, because I imagine there's probably a little bit of confusion there. So Doom as we know him, or Doctor Doom as you think of him, the green cloak, which actually will look amazing on the Iron Man armor. Oh my God, that looks so good. Doctor Doom with the green cloak, with the, the iconic suit, that Doctor Doom existed from the time he first appeared until Secret Wars. But what ended up happening is during the main Secret Wars event, when Doctor Doom was fighting Reed Richards and they were having as much of an emotional battle as they were a physical battle, Doom finally admitted that his greatest regret, or the one thing he hated most, was that he was not equal to Reed Richards. He didn't have Reed Richards' life. Dr. Doom did not have a Susan Storm of his own. He did not have a Johnny Storm. He didn't have a Ben grim. You know, he didn't have that family connection that he loathed Reed Richards for having. And so because of that, you know, the question was asked by Doom, if you could do it all over again, would you do it different? Reed said yes. And so what happened was the Molecule Man Owen Reese, who was basically the go-between for Dr. Doom to access the powers of the Beyonders, took that ability away from Dr. Doom and gave it to Reed Richards. And what Reed Richards did was set everything back, effectively resetting the universe. Now, of course, this was Jonathan Hickman setting the stage for Marvel to basically reboot, which of course Marvel botched in the extreme and didn't do. And so the result is that when Reed Richards set things back to the way they were supposed to be, instead of making Dr. Doom inherently a bad guy, instead what he did is he restored Victor Von Doom's face, and Victor Von Doom effectively abandoned Latveria and went on this role of basically trying to restore himself and trying to prove himself to being a good guy. Now, on the surface, the premise might seem kind of lackluster, but the storytelling is anything but. This is some amazing storytelling with Dr. Doom, and that's why I'm kind of glad that Brian Michael Bendis is the one running the show here, just because of the fact that if it was anybody else, I'd be a little hesitant about it. But Brian Michael Bendis is amazing when it comes to developing characters. When it comes to writing characters, it's like the one thing that he's good at above all others. I mean, he's good at a lot of other stuff too, storytelling and so on, but if I wanted to see a new character created, I would leave it to Brian Michael Bendis to be the one to do it. But jumping back into the story again, what we end up finding out is that El Diablo has managed to capture Maria Hill. Now, this is kind of weird because keep in mind, this part of the story takes place before the events of like Captain America, Steve Rogers, The Oath, where Captain America becomes director of S.H.I.E.L.D. That hasn't happened yet, you know, as far as this part of the story is concerned. And so because of this, Maria Hill is still director of S.H.I.E.L.D. But the funny thing is that with Victor Von Doom basically walking around, no one really knows what his face looks like. All they can do is recognize him by his voice. Now, of course, Dr. Doom showing up, or I guess Victor, you know, showing up to El Diablo, there's no contest here. I mean, it's not even remotely close. El Diablo was a D-level villain at best. I mean, he was a guy who was so irrelevant that you've probably never even heard of him before, and it's not even worth explaining. It's really just, he's a guy who's like this genius biochemist and basically just starts making chemicals and things like that to allow him to perform, you know, magical stunts or what appear to be magical stunts. Now, this is the funny thing here, is because there's a difference between what El Diablo does and what Victor does. El Diablo is, you know, chemistry masquerading as magic. Victor Von Doom is magic and sorcery. He's the real deal. And so because of this, El Diablo is easily taken out, and in fact, he's eradicated by Dr. Doom. And that's the crazy thing, is because Victor's basically showing there's no holds barred here. But in the idea of him killing people, or really killing bad guys, it's a reflection of the idea that he's basically trying to revamp himself. He's trying to restore himself. Now, we don't know how it was that El Diablo took Maria Hill prisoner, and even then, Victor doesn't really address how it was that El Diablo took Maria Hill prisoner. He just says, look, you were captured by like a D-list villain, so I'll walk away, you walk away, I won't tell anybody. And then Maria Hill's just kind of like, what? And that's what makes this so cool. But something else that I also hope you notice here is that Dr. Doom, as he's being drawn in this story, looks a lot like Vincent Cassell. For those of you guys who don't know who that is, Vincent Cassell was the guy who played Night Fox in Ocean's 13, and I could imagine, Ocean's 12 rather, and I could imagine him playing Dr. Doom in like a movie that Fox didn't screw up. If Marvel got like the Fantastic Four back, I could see him playing Dr. Doom, and it would actually be pretty cool, to be honest. But what ends up happening here is Dr. Doom transitions over to a woman by the name of Amara Pereira. Now, Amara Pereira was introduced over the course of really, you know, the first Iron Man story arc as part of All New, All Different Marvel. And the way Bendis introduced her was really kind of like a what just happened kind of situation where, you know, she meets Tony Stark, the two of them, you know, have drinks and so on and so forth. She makes it clear right off the bat she's not going to sleep with him, but her genius level intellect is established in the fact that she's developed a cure for the mutant X gene, but has decided not to use it. Now, it's really just one of those Brian Michael Bendis things where he's just like, here's how smart they are, and we're never going to use it, you're never going to do anything with it, or we may down the line, we have no idea. But again, it's really just kind of establishing the intelligence of her character and what she's capable of. Now, from here, it's really kind of a discussion about what's going on with regards to Victor Von Doom himself, as well as what's going on with Tony Stark and Amara Pereira. Now, of course, we know there's no real romance between the two of them, or at least there doesn't seem to be, but in this part of the story, or at least in this segment, we've basically moved past the events of Civil War II, and what's basically happened is this is the aftermath of Tony Stark when he's presumably died. And so because of this, Doom really addresses, or really speaks with Amara about the feelings that she may or may not have had about Tony Stark, about even if those feelings were budding, at the very least, it's something that she can't act on right now because of the fact that Tony Stark is no longer part of the equation. And so what Doom is basically doing is he's effectively turning over a new leaf. He really just kind of goes to speak with her. Now, this is a circumstance where his reputation precedes him in the sense that when he introduces himself, when he basically says, I'm Victor Von Doom, the first thing to come to mind is Dr. Doom. And so right off the bat, Pereira's initial response is, this is a bad guy. Like, he's a villain. Now, of course, Doom isn't here for anything grandiose. He's not here for anything major. He's not even hitting on her or anything like that. It's him just basically saying, I came here because I know who you are, and you remind me of someone, and I just wanted to meet you. And so what ends up happening is he actually just kind of teleports himself away. And the reason seems to be that instead of him continuing a conversation, or instead of him just being here strictly for that purpose, he was more or less forced to leave. And the reason why he was forced to leave is because of the fact that almost immediately after he takes off, Ben Grimm arrives. Now, with regards to Ben Grimm in Marvel Comics, that's kind of, again, another one of these funny situations. Marvel has yet to reestablish the Fantastic Four, and we don't know if they ever will, just because of the fact that Marvel got mad that Fox wouldn't give them the rights back to the Fantastic Four, so Marvel took their ball and they ran home. So because of that, we'll probably never see the Fantastic Four restored unless Marvel gets the rights back to the Fantastic Four in film form. But in lieu of that, we still have Ben Grimm, we still have Johnny Storm. Now, of course, Johnny Storm's with the Inhumans, and Ben Grimm is basically an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. He's effectively their strong arm. He's the guy that goes out and carries out missions that require a kind of finesse that can't be found outside of somebody who doesn't have super strength and a really bad temperament, if you understand where I'm coming from. He beats people up. That's basically what he does. But it's still kind of cool, you know. But from here, again, we don't really know exactly why it's here or why he's here. All we really know is that he's here just because of the fact that he's presumably chasing Victor Von Doom. Now, at this point, we jump over to Victor when he actually begins the process of making himself Iron Man. Now, of course, again, because of the fact that Tony Stark's physical body was killed, more or less, I mean, he's really just kind of in stasis. What Stark had done is he had downloaded his mind into a computer program. Now, Marvel doing this served two purposes. The first was to allow us to continue to see interactions with Tony Stark, or the second was to basically separate the lock from the key. And what's going to happen here later on down the line is we're going to see Tony Stark's mind restored back to his body, and Tony Stark will return. It's just a really easy way of ensuring that availability is there, but also allowing us to see something that goes on with his particular character. Now, the discussion between the two is actually really interesting because it's half admiration and half, dear God, I hope you don't take my suit. That's really what kind of goes on here. Keep in mind, despite the fact that they've been enemies in the world of Marvel Comics, when it comes to people of a certain level of intelligence, there's a shared respect among all of them just because of what they're capable of. So Dr. Doom is hated by T'Challa because of the fact that Doom basically invaded Wakanda during Doom War. But there's still some measure of respect in terms of his intelligence and the idea that, you know, T'Challa would not underestimate the intelligence of Dr. Doom. It doesn't mean he respects him as a person. I mean, he despises him as a person, but he respects his intelligence. And it's usually like that when it comes across these different characters in the realm of Marvel Comics. Now, with regards to Tony Stark's conversation here with Victor, keep in mind, Victor's appearance and his role in Tony Stark's life, you know, really showed us how much Victor had changed in the first story arc of Invincible Iron Man, when Victor had basically established that he had abandoned his role as ruler of Latveria, and it actually helped Tony Stark to capture Madame Mask. And so, because of this, Victor basically says, hey, look, I mean, at this point, you're just a hologram, so there's not much you can do to stop me, but I'm turning over a new leaf. If you can't be Iron Man, someone needs to. And so because of that, basically what ends up happening is Doom undertakes the mantle of Iron Man and whisks himself away. But the crazy thing about this is that the entire situation is being monitored by Dr. Doom's mom, who's effectively, you know, who simply has returned to life. But there's also some disembodied voice that's communicating with her, someone that we can't see. So again, the idea of Dr. Doom's mom, you know, being alive here is a huge revelation. And the reason why is she was basically the basis behind Dr. Doom's character. I mean, she was really the origin behind everything. From the time that Dr. Doom was a little boy and his mom was convicted of witchcraft, you know, and then eventually was killed, he had always been on an effort to gain power in order to free her soul. And that's effectively what had happened. She had delved in witchcraft, she had sold her soul to Mephisto, who passes for the devil in Marvel Comics, and the result was that following her death, Mephisto was going to hold her soul forever. Well, eventually we ended up finding out that there was a bargain that was struck between Doom and Mephisto, that Doom would be allowed to fight for the freedom of his mother's soul once a year, and if he was successful, his mother would be freed. Now, this was Mephisto toying with Doom, and the reason why is because of the fact that the Demon Lord Mephisto is the most powerful in his own realm, and so it was almost impossible for Doom to win. And so this led into the Triumph and Torment storyline when Dr. Doom and Dr. Strange came together and then managed to fight off Mephisto and free Dr. Doom's, free the soul of Dr. Doom's mom, which in turn went on to heaven. Now, that was the end of her character. that was that. I mean, it was done, it was over. From that point, it was just kind of fleshing out Doom's character without the holdover of his mom's soul being held by the devil or by Mephisto. And so because of that, what this does is it comes back and it says somewhere along the line, presumably because of the events of Secret Wars, his mother's soul has been freed from heaven and she's basically been returned to her physical body. And so what this does is it changes everything, because now Dr. Doom's mom is alive and the question becomes, what happens when they meet? Now, at this point, we transition back over to Ben Grimm. Him being in Latveria exists strictly for the purpose of tracking down Doom. That's really all it is. I mean, there's not a whole lot to go on here. It's really just him kind of trashing the place and then basically convincing the people in Latveria, or I guess the members of this ruling class, to basically tell him where Dr. Doom is, but they don't know. They really have no idea where it was that he went to. All they know is that he effectively just abandoned them. So again, you know, it's just a demonstration of the fact that there's a lot going on besides Dr. Doom becoming Iron Man. There's still some pretty nefarious things. Now, at this point, we actually pick up over at Cambridge in England, and again, we join Dr. Doom showing up to meet with Amara Pereira. But the funny thing about this is that he calls out her name, and then she turns around and shoots him. She shoots him in the shoulder. He's like, what? You shot me! You shot me in the arm! Why did you shoot me in the arm? For all you Austin Powers fans, what was that guy's name? Was it Mustafa? I can't remember what his name was. It was Will Ferrell who played the character. It was a really, really funny moment from that movie. But the idea here, though, is that, again, this is really just kind of Dr. Doom meeting with her, but it's also this idea that her life is drastically being changed because of the actions of Dr. Doom. And the reason why is because it's not enough for him to just kind of show up in her life and then start turning things all topsy-turvy by saying, hey, look, I'm trying to be a good guy, you know, and all that kind of good stuff. But Ben Grimm also has managed to track down Victor. And so because of this, the fight between the two of them is pretty interesting. It's pretty short, but it's pretty interesting. But the result of this is that we end up finding out that Dr. Doom had, of course, overcome Ben Grimm, but it happens off panel. Instead, what we end up doing is we actually jump directly to where it is that Amara Pereira has been taken by Dr. Doom, which is basically his own little base of operations, his own little refuge outside of Latveria. And what ends up happening here is he basically says, hey, look, you know, I'm here because I'm trying to be a good guy. Well, then Amara's response is, but why though? Like, what happened to you that's changed your entire view of the world? And this is when Dr. Doom, this is when Brian Michael Bendis references Secret Wars. And that's one of the coolest things here, is because when All New, All Different Marvel first kicked off, there was almost no reference to Secret Wars. It was almost like Secret Wars never happened. We knew it did, and there were maybe a handful of people who remembered, but that was it. It wasn't like everybody remembered what was going on with Secret Wars and everybody was talking about, hey man, you remember that time that Doom got absolute power? It was like this dirty little secret that was swept under the rug, which of course, again, I kind of think was Marvel's response to the idea that they chose not to reboot. But with Brian Michael Bendis focusing here on Secret Wars, it's basically Doom just recounting his story to Amara Pereira, telling her, look, there was a time when I had absolute power. There was a time when I was God. But it's also Brian Michael Bendis injecting a little bit of his own history with regards to Doom, in the sense that Doom goes on to basically say, I've always tried to gain absolute power. Even after freeing my mother's soul, you know, I always continued to gain absolute power. And the reason why was because I thought I was living up to my potential. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought it was my lot in life, my role in life. But he basically says, time after time, I consistently failed. Whether it was capturing the power of the Beyonder the first time, whether it was capturing the power of Galactus the first time, whether it was harnessing a cosmic cube, you know, whether it was gaining just these insane abilities, you know, whether it was getting the power of the Beyonders the second time, when I invaded Wakanda and I forced Black Panther to render all vibranium on Earth completely inert. Every single time I went on these campaigns to gain absolute power, I always failed. And so his idea was, if I failed in that direction, maybe I would succeed in the other direction. And so for him, it's really just kind of logic at this point in time. Now, there's also a lot of things that Brian Michael Bendis doesn't say that he's really inferring here, in the sense that when Dr. Doom essentially remembers everything during Secret Wars, he also remembers his conflict with Reed Richards. He always remembers what he said. And it could simply just be the fact that there was a lot of catharsis that came out of Victor Von Doom admitting to Reed Richards that he always wanted to be him. Maybe it's just that was one thing that he was always holding on to, and the reason why he simply could not become a good guy. Again, Brian Michael Bendis, one of the reasons why I love the way he writes characters is because he treats them like people. And so he doesn't tell us every single thing they're thinking, because when you have a conversation with someone, they don't tell you every single thing they're thinking. You're just kind of forced to read between the lines if you choose to do so, and get a better understanding of where they're coming from by how it is they say things, why they're saying things, and their own, you know, their own body language. And so because of that, you know, Bendis basically just kind of says, look, you know, you got to infer a a little bit here, but in the end, Doom is trying to become a good guy. Doom is trying to do the right thing. Now, of course, what ends up happening here is we end up having Ben Grimm actually transition over to the old lab of Dr. Doom. And when he gets there, we end up actually finding out like the little chunks of rock on his face and on his body start falling off. And this is when we actually find out the reason this is happening is because of the fact that Dr. Doom's mom is residing inside of his old laboratory. And so again, this is really, really cool. It's one of these really cool situations that begin to unfold simply because of the fact that we end up having Dr. Doom's mom showing that she's extremely powerful in terms of her abilities. Now, at this point, we switch back over to Maria Hill. And the funny thing about this is that Maria Hill, of course, if she was smart, would have kept this information to herself regarding the fact that she was somehow captured by El Diablo. But what she's basically done is she's more or less done that to a degree, but she also kind of has everybody out looking for Dr. Doom, or at the very least, Ben Grimm looking for Dr. Doom. This is the reason why Grimm's looking for him in the first place, is because Maria Hill tasked him to do so. Now, the reason why it was Ben Grimm and not all of S.H.I.E.L.D. is because it's really just Maria Hill trying to make sure that her capture by El Diablo and her being freed by Victor Von Doom is kept under the radar. If the world became aware of the fact that the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., the world's foremost intelligence gathering organization and peacekeeping force, was captured by a D-list villain, people would lose faith in S.H.I.E.L.D. in its entirety. They would say S.H.I.E.L.D. is the most inept organization ever, run by the most ridiculous person ever. We should not allow them to have the kind of power that they have. It would just bring S.H.I.E.L.D. crashing down to the ground just because of the fact that everybody in there would look like buffoons. And so because of this, Dr. Doom basically just arrives on the helicarrier, which is really kind of funny here because this is one of these are these little goodies, right? These little tidbits, these fun little things that we get with his character, the way he's written by Bendis. When he shows up here, Maria Hill's like, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "Well, I mean, think about it this way. If I had done something, if I had shown up on the radar somewhere, then you probably would have sent everybody in S.H.I.E.L.D. to come after me. And then you would have sent, other individuals, Ben Grimm or somebody like that to come after me. But I appear here, which saves you all kinds of money. It saves you dozens of man hours. It saves you all kinds of time, and it keeps you from losing face, And so basically, it's Dr. Doom's kind of like, I did you a favor. But the question becomes, why are you having Ben Grimm coming after me? Why are you having him chase me? I literally saved your life. And so there's a little back and forth that goes on here, with regards to their discussion, and their conversations. But the idea here is that Dr. Doom basically says, look, I saved your life. You owe me for that. All right, take Ben Grimm off my tail and stop having S.H.I.E.L.D. monitor Dr. Pereira. Now, the question that also comes after this is, where is Ben Grimm at the moment? Where's he at this particular point in time? And the reason why this question is brought up is because Dr. Doom makes the statement that he basically defeated Ben Grimm. Well, because of the fact that Ben Grimm hasn't returned, Maria Hill's question is, where is he? At which point, we end up having one of her agents basically say he's in Latveria. Well, at this point, Doom whisks off. And the reason why is because of the fact that he knows no good can come out of Ben Grimm being in Latveria. The other half of this is that Ben Grimm may start stumbling around and asking questions that he has no business asking about the history of Victor Von Doom outside of the various, escapades that the Fantastic Four have been involved in with Dr. Doom over the course of his history as their main villain. And so because of this is when Brian Michael Bendis basically shows us the current state of Latveria. And the reason why this matters is because of the fact that in the first story arc of Invincible Iron Man, we saw what Latveria was about to a degree, but only insofar that the place was in ruins following Dr. Doom abandoning it. But we hadn't really learned how far it had fallen. And what we end up finding out is, again, it's basically, Brian Michael Bendis refreshing us on the fact that the general who was left in charge by Victor to basically restore Latveria or keep Latveria in check has essentially become corrupt, and he's more or less turned it into a totalitarian state, giving himself absolute power. Now, of course, Victor basically takes all this out. I mean, he basically goes, to Karadek, I think his name is, the general at the time, and says, look, you're not going to be the one that runs this place with absolute power. I clearly cannot trust you to do that. I clearly cannot trust you to be the one who controls things with absolute certainty. And so what he does is he says, go find a woman by the name of Angela Crore. Now, Angela Crore is an example of where Bendis just kind of injects his own little bit into individual stories, because Angela Crore is basically a new character. She never existed before. We've never really seen or heard of her before. She's been created by Brian Michael Bendis for the sake of this story in order to basically allow Doom to operate outside of Latveria and presumably return to his normal role without having to worry about rebuilding Latveria. Eventually it will go back to its normal self. But what ends up happening here is Dr. Doom basically stumbles into Ben Grimm, only for us to discover that the little bits and pieces of Ben Grimm are falling off all over the place, all at the hands of Dr. Doom's mom. Now, this encounter between the two of them is crazy, and it's one of the coolest things ever, because Victor's response to this is the most predictable response. And again, this is why I love the way that Brian Michael Bendis writes characters. Victor Von Doom's response is, who are you and why are you acting as my mom? Well, of course, Cynthia begins to effectively say, hey, look, you know, I am your mom. Like, I am your mom in every sense of the word. But Victor does not want to believe it. And the reason why is because if he did, everything that he's worked for up to now would feel as though it's essentially been lost. Because remember, a majority of his life was defined by his mom's soul having been captured. And it's one of these situations where it's like, if everything that happened to me led to where I am right now, then would I go back and change it? And Doom would say no. I mean, we've had that conversation with the Mayor Pereira. He basically says, everything I've done over the course of my life and the motivations behind those actions have led me to this moment right now. If any of those variables were to change, well, then suddenly everything could change. It could be that I would wake up tomorrow and suddenly I have the Infinity Gauntlet in my hand and I have absolute power over the universe. So Dr. Doom essentially says, look, you know, if his mother is alive, then the question is, how did she come back? And if she is really back, then what role is she going to play? But it's also the idea that at the same time, and this is one of the reasons why I love this so much, at the same time, this is Victor Von Doom's mom. You know, for those of us who have lost a family member that's very, very close to us, what would we give to have that family member back? I don't know about you guys, but there are those individuals in my life that I've lost that I would literally sacrifice everything. I'd walk away from YouTube forever and I'd give up everything I owned if it meant that I could spend like another day talking to them, and I would talk to them for the whole day. I would literally walk away from everything if it meant that I could do that. So that's one of the cool things, is that's one of the other reasons why I love Bendis, the way he handles characters, is because it's Dr. Doom at his most basic. It's the idea that Victor, despite all the bravado, despite all the pomp and circumstance and all the power and all that kind of crazy cool stuff, at the end of the day, it's him, it's a son who is really kind of forced to believe that his mother may very well still be alive. But what ends up happening here is his mother actually says, look, I'm proud of who you are right now. Like, I'm proud of what you've become. I'm proud of what you've done at this point in time. But the other half of this is she's still very much a dark character. She's not evil, or at least doesn't seem to be that way. Instead, her initial response is, this guy, this Ben Grimm thing, needs to go away. We need to eliminate him. We need to get rid of him. Doom's response is, no. He lives, send him away. Just send him back to S.H.I.E.L.D., wherever it is that he needs to go to. But what ends up happening here, and what's basically taking place, is she basically just leaves. When Dr. Doom is, again, refusing to believe that she's alive, when Dr. Doom's refusing to believe that it's his mom, she says, look, fine, we'll get back together, we'll get our heads cleared, we'll get things sorted out when you're more inclined to be receptive. And so what ends up happening here is we switch back to Cynthia Von Doom. We switch back to her base of operations where she's, you know, engaging in all her magic, sorcery, different things like that. And what we find out is that the disembodied voice that she's been talking to belongs to Reed Richards from the Ultimate Universe. So this is crazy, because what it means is that Reed Richards from the Ultimate Universe is still alive. Reed Richards from the Ultimate Universe is presumably going to be the main enemy of Victor Von Doom. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you guys are new here to Comments Explain, make sure you guys hit the subscribe button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like and leave a comment down below and let me know what you think, because I'm gonna tell you right now, I love like Victor Von Doom as Iron Man. Oh my God, it's so good. It's so cool. I mean, it's gonna be short-lived. It's not gonna be something that'll last forever. And I think that's the most disappointing thing, is because it'd be cool to see him don the Iron Man armor like every once in a while when he goes into a conflict. I mean, I still want to see like the return of the old Victor Von Doom. But for this story, you know, for what we have at the moment, for the direction that Marvel's going in, it's a beautifully written story. And I really think it's probably one of the best that Brian Michael Bendis has done for a little while. But
No.
okay, so we are finally back into Infamous Iron Man. I've seen a lot of you guys asking for it. One thing you guys got to keep in mind is that when it comes to Marvel, and DC Rebirth has spoiled me so bad when it comes to this, one of the things when it comes to Marvel is they publish a story once a month. So when the story finishes, if it takes 6 issues, we have to wait 6 months. I can't make them print them faster. As much as I wish I could, which is one of the downsides to Marvel Legacy, is it'll probably be 6 months before a lot of the stories are finished, although they may be cranking out 4-issue story arcs, in which case it's only 4 months. But the fact remains, we've had to wait a while until this story got finished. But Infamous Iron Man is still one of the absolute best Iron Man stories ever. I love Doom Iron Man, and I love Ruby Williams Iron Man. Like they're great, I guess Ironheart, but I think they're great characters. But Doom Iron Man just brings this pizzazz, like a villain turned superhero, in such a cool way. So for those of you guys who are playing catch up with regards to this, if you guys never saw the first one, it'll be down in the description in the Iron Man playlist. But the idea of Infamous Iron Man all really came out of two things. It came out of All New, All Different Marvel, and it came out of the believed death of Tony Stark after Civil War II. So of course, Secret Wars 2015 basically dealt with the idea of Victor Von Doom becoming God. He had just an insane amount of power. I mean, he controlled Battle World, and he had the power of the Beyonders, and he could do anything he wanted to. And it was like the culmination of everything from his introduction in Marvel Comics all the way up to Secret Wars. And the way that Hickman did it was absolutely amazing. But the fact remains here, with regards to the events after Secret Wars 2015, going into All New, All Different Marvel, it was somewhat of a redemption story. Doom had basically been reborn, more or less, by Reed Richards, with his face completely restored. That was a hallmark of his character, is that his face was scarred just because of his experiments and so on and so forth. But the idea is that during Civil War II, when Tony Stark had battled Carol Danvers and was believed to have been dead, Dr. Doom picked up the mantle of Iron Man alongside Riri Williams. So where Riri Williams followed the character as Ironheart, Dr. Doom basically became the new Iron Man in the form of Infamous Iron Man. And the way that he did this was really more along the lines of just using a combination of Iron Man's technology along with his own magic. And it was super cool because one of the first things that we ended up seeing was him basically going through and trying to convince everybody he was a good guy. But in the background, there was this subplot with the return of Dr. Doom's mom. Now, Cynthia Von Doom was this character who was largely intertwined into the origin of Dr. Doom. And this story will actually build off of an existing story called Triumph and Torment, which is amazing. It's a Dr. Doom, Doctor Strange crossover, and it's super cool. But the whole idea is that the origin of Cynthia was that she was basically a character who had dabbled in witchcraft. And the result was that she was basically ousted by the villagers. They really just kind of condemned her and different things like that. And that was the end of her. Her passing was a huge part of Victor Von Doom. But the idea is that going forward into his future's publication history, we ended up finding out that his mother's soul had been bonded by Mephisto, who was basically the representation of Satan in the realm of Marvel Comics. And the idea was that Dr. Doom had gone again and again and again in an effort to basically rescue her soul with no perceived way to be able to pull it off. Basically, Mephisto, being as powerful as he is in his home dimension, was seemingly unstoppable. Doom couldn't actually win, and so it seemed like his mother's soul was going to be bound for all eternity to the realm of Mephisto. Now, this led into Triumph and Torment, which dealt with Dr. Doom and Doctor Strange teaming up and then going to the realm of Mephisto, defeating him, and then freeing the soul of Victor Von Doom's mom. And so that's how things kind of resided, going all the way up until Secret Wars 2015. The problem with this was that when All New, All Different Marvel launched and Cynthia Von Doom showed up, we didn't really know what was going on because she's not part of the clutches of Mephisto anymore. She's out doing her own thing. And so it seemed like just kind of reintroducing her character in a way to tell new stories. The other half of this was that she was allied with Reed Richards, and that was a crazy thing. It was the Ultimate Universe Reed Richards, but Reed Richards nonetheless. And that's where the plot started to thicken, because it was the idea, what do these two characters have in common, and if they're working together, do they have an ulterior motive to get revenge on Doom as Iron Man? So the idea is that this basically results in Riri Williams and Victor Von Doom meeting each other for the very first time. And it's a really cool exchange because Riri's whole storytelling, everything that goes on with her character, is the fact that she doesn't really know what she's doing. She's experimenting, she's trying to figure herself out as a hero. She has the AI of Tony Stark to guide her as best he can, but when it comes to being a superhero, it's riding a bike. Sometimes you just gotta jump on, start pedaling, and hope you don't fall. Doom encountering Ironheart is a cool scenario because in truth, she's woefully over her head, because you're talking about trying to battle one of the most powerful sorcerers in all of Marvel Comics. And when I say the most powerful sorcerers, I'm talking about a guy who was able to steal the power of Galactus. So Doom is not just some guy who's really strong on Earth, he's powerful across the board. The other half of this is that it's more of a conversation than an actual battle between the two of them, partially because Ironheart's listening to what it is that Tony Stark's saying, but the other half is because she's just curious. She's curious about Dr. Doom, because with the two of them being as powerful as they are, really him being as powerful as he is, and then suddenly becoming a good guy, it begs the question, what could he achieve? And that's the cool thing about Infamous Iron Man. With Dr. Doom being one of the most powerful beings in existence, if he becomes a good guy, imagine what he could accomplish. Imagine what he could pull off. And so ultimately, this conversation between him and Ironheart leads to the idea of Doom basically saying that he had a spirit journey of sorts. He had this sort of vision where he communed with someone from the future, didn't know who they were, and they were in possession of incredible technology. And the idea is to regain that vision. Now, Bendis isn't just pulling this out of nowhere. It's basically Bendis building on all this stuff when it comes to Doctor Doom. Despite his arrogance and his hubris and all those aspects of his character that he displayed before, he was nothing if not methodical. And whenever it was that he came across something he didn't fully understand, it was research, learn everything there is to know, and then make a move. And that's what he does here. He's basically just kind of received this spirit vision somewhere along the line, and the goal is to duplicate the process, which was basically heightened adrenaline that led to this vision, and then in turn decipher it, find out what it is, and then see if there's a way that he can use it. The cool thing about this is that in order to pull it off, he basically just has Ironheart attack him. He's just like, attack me with all the energy you have. But the funny thing is that when this happens and he's presumably kind of knocked unconscious, he basically ends up finding out that the person he's communing with is Tony Stark. And this is crazy because it looks like Tony Stark with the powers of Doctor Strange. And so it's kind of weird because we have no indication of where this is going. It's basically just the idea that Tony Stark is communing directly with Doctor Strange from some point in the future in a city of New York that just seems to be wildly technologically advanced. Now again, this is one of the reasons why I love Bendis when he ties into continuity. He doesn't always do that, but sometimes he does. During Jonathan Hickman's run on Avengers and New Avengers, it was the first story arc when Captain America basically destroyed the Infinity Gauntlet. He tried to use it to stop the incursions, Earths crashing into each other. The Infinity Gauntlet couldn't handle it. All the gems shattered except for the Time Stone, which disappeared into the time stream. The idea was that when that happened, nobody knew where the Time Stone went. Eventually it popped back up again. It grabbed Captain America and a handful of others and started jumping them into the future. There was a point where Captain America ended up something like 50,000 years in the future, and the world was just a giant sentient mind. And so it's cool to see how those things play out in the sense that maybe this is a part of that time stream. And so this kind of thing is something that Bendis will probably build on. For the moment, it's basically just, Tony Stark saying, you cannot be Iron Man anymore. You have to stop. But we don't know why. The implication is that he's drawing the wrong kind of attention from some external force out there, but we don't know for sure. The other half of this is what goes on with this version of Reed Richards, this Ultimate Reed. He really just seemingly popped out of nowhere. And it was the idea that he initially appeared to Ben Grimm. And that's kind of a big deal because remember, ever since Secret Wars ended and All New, All Different Marvel started, Valeria Richards, Franklin Richards, Susan Storm, and Reed himself were basically just out there in the middle of nowhere creating universes using the Molecule Man's powers and then just throwing them out there. And that's all they've done. Now we know because of Marvel Legacy, we know they're still out there doing their own thing. What it did is it left Ben Grimm and Johnny Storm back on Earth to pick up the pieces. And so they still are reeling from the after effects of being part of the Fantastic Four for so long, only to have no idea where Reed and Susan are at the moment, what they're doing, and why they haven't made their presence known. Now, of course, this is Marvel basically handling the Ike Perlmutter push to keep the Fantastic Four out of comics so long as Fox has the rights to them in film form. But it does make for some cool storytelling because it's basically the idea that Ben Grimm encountering this ultimate version of Reed does not believe that he's Reed, and it actually results in a fight between the two of them. But it also deals with the idea that Ben Grimm is still getting over the fact that Reed isn't there, that Johnny Storm is still getting over the fact that Reed isn't there. They're dealing with it as best they can. When Ben Grimm goes to Johnny and says, hey, some version of Reed showed up to me, I don't think it's our Reed, Johnny Storm can't handle it. He's like, look, it's too soon, it's too close, and he just leaves. It's the Johnny Storm bravado. It's the, I've got to put on the big front and I've got to look like a tough guy instead of allowing his emotions to kind of be exposed to Ben Grimm. That's a hallmark of their characters in the sense that when it comes down to it, they fight together, but in moments of peace, when there's no real conflict, they're very guarded in terms of how they relate to each other. With Dr. Doom having passed out after his vision quest and then being dropped off at a S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier by Riri Williams because presumably it's the only thing she knew to do, what ends up happening is one of the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents shows up and then actually kills a couple of agents and then goes to, at least seems to try to kill Dr. Doom. Now, of course, we end up finding out that this was basically mind control done by Dr. Doom's mom, which is really kind of cool because then the question becomes, what's her motivation here? What's her basis behind this? Now, with her bringing Dr. Doom back to her home, what it does is it introduces a little bit of a retcon here. In the origin story of Dr. Doom, we had the idea that his mom was practicing witchcraft, but didn't really know much about it. What this does is it injects the idea that his mom tried to get him to practice witchcraft. He was terrified of it and ran off, and his mom considered him a coward for it. But it's a little tiny retcon, but it's cool because it provides this really interesting context into how it is that Doom views his mom. That maybe his mom, despite the fact that she was practicing witchcraft, was not the great mom that we believe she was when it came to Dr. Doom. That she was basically witchcraft above all, and if my son won't do it, then my son is a coward, and basically just kind of cut him loose. And so again, it's interesting because in this moment is the question, explain to me what's going on. How are you here? I thought your spirit went to heaven. How are you back here? How can you exist in this realm? And a lot of these questions aren't readily answered. Instead, it's just kind of like, well, we'll meditate on it. You know, we'll get together and we'll just kind of meditate and we'll maybe have this discussion somewhere along the line, but that's it. There's no real answers given to him by Cynthia Von Doom. The only thing that she really hits at is that you are safe here. This is a safe place. She keeps hitting at the idea that she has greater plans for her son. Now, this also begins to show itself in the sense that she's teaching him more about witchcraft, and that's the important thing. When it comes to Dr. Doom, he's wildly powerful, but he doesn't know everything about everything. There's always something new to learn. That's the basis of his character. Ultimately, in the middle of all this, we end up having Reed Richards show up out of nowhere and basically say, we had a plan. He's not supposed to be here. And so that's why this is cool, is because the plot thickens. It gets more complicated because when Ben Grimm shows up in Latveria and Doom is just sort of sent flying out of this dimensional plane and says, dude, you have to run, you have to go. We end up finding out that Ben Grimm had transported him to a SHIELD helicarrier. And that's when Doctor Strange starts to come into the mix. One thing to keep in mind, when it comes to the Marvel hierarchy among the various characters, there are a lot of people that can use magic. Doctor Strange is the Sorcerer Supreme. Now, while there are other characters who may be more powerful than him in one form or another and at one point or another, for the most part, he is the authority on magic. Usually, Doctor Strange is considered to be the most powerful of all the magic wielders, but momentarily, somebody will pop out with more power than him. But because Doctor Strange is the Sorcerer Supreme, and because both Strange and Doom had fought together in freeing the soul of Cynthia Von Doom from the clutches of Mephisto, they have this kind of bond between the two of them. But Dr. Doom, despite the fact that he could leave the SHIELD helicarrier, chooses not to. And the reason why he chooses not to is because he's scared. Notice this moment. When Doctor Strange says, if you're here, it's because you're afraid. And if you're afraid, then I am terrified. And that's why it's so cool, is because Doom has seen and done it all. If there's something out there he's terrified of, it's something either Strange has not encountered before, or if he has encountered it, it's of a level so extreme that it terrifies one of the most powerful sorcerers in the world. And so as they begin going through, and as they begin talking about what this threat may be, with Ben Grimm just sort of watching all these events unfold, suddenly Reed Richards shows up and immediately starts challenging all these different members of S.H.I.E.L.D. And as these conversations go back and forth, these two things are juxtaposed right next to each other. Reed Richards just like, you know, making his way in there saying, hey, look, I'm not here to attack. I'm here to just talk to Victor Von Doom, tell me where he is. And then it gets to the point where Von Doom says, I do not think that's Reed Richards. I think it's someone else. And then suddenly everything changes. And that's when we end up finding out this is not Reed Richards. It was never Reed Richards. This person is Mephisto. And that is cool. Brian Michael Bendis, kudos. When Mephisto reveals himself, but Doctor Strange starts putting the two together and basically begins to realize it's Mephisto. And so the question is, has he rebound Cynthia Von Doom's soul? Well, then we end up finding out that's not the case at all. Instead, Mephisto does not readily engage them in battle. He does to a degree, but it takes the combined efforts of Doctor Strange and Victor Von Doom to kind of run him off. What we end up finding out here is that Cynthia Von Doom was never there, that Reed Richards was never there. All of this has been a ruse by Mephisto, revenge for freeing the soul of Cynthia Von Doom. Now, let that sink in for a second. We're talking about two of the most powerful sorcerers in existence, Doctor Strange and Doctor Doom. Both of them duped by Mephisto. That's how he works. Mephisto doesn't usually pop up and then just start saying absolute power and immediately start attacking everybody. He works behind the scenes to dupe people. He appears in immortal guise, presumably aiding you, and the idea is to trick you into asking for his help. And when you give it to him, he'll take your soul when you die. That's how it works with him. It's one of the coolest things when it comes to Marvel Comics, because he's a cosmic entity who's insanely powerful, but doesn't readily delve in action and battle. And so the idea is that because people still don't necessarily trust Doctor Doom, and because Mephisto says, this was all just a ruse for me to trick you, that's all it is, I'm just giving you a hard time and I will be back for more, then it puts infamous Iron Man on edge, because it's been just basically saying, Mephisto will probably be a big part of the stories later on down the line. We'll see more of him here than we probably have anywhere else. But it's also infamous Iron Man trying to basically instill the fact in S.H.I.E.L.D. and almost everybody that he is there to be a good guy. And so at the end of the day, they say, fine, then we'll just let you do that. We'll let you be a good guy. We really don't have any reason to stop you because you haven't done anything within recent memory that we can do anything about, because remember, not everybody remembers the events of Secret Wars. And so because of that, it's basically him just kind of going forward and him just being a good guy, continuing to be a hero. It's this great story dealing with how he became Iron Man. Some of the most important moments of his life come to bear, and Mephisto getting this little bit of revenge and then presumably coming back later on down the line. Okay, so we are picking up with the hunt for, or I guess really the search for Tony Stark. This is a big story. This is something like 8 issues long or something like that. And Bendis doesn't usually do stories that long. For those of you guys who don't know, more often than not in Marvel Comics, most story arcs are about 6 issues long. For Iron Man, this comes after the events of Secret Empire. Now, of course, Secret Empire, as most people know, is one of my favorite stories ever when it comes to the character of Captain America. Well, really, it actually goes as far back as Civil War II, when Tony Stark was basically killed by Carol Danvers. Essentially, Tony Stark had just kind of been in a catatonic state. He was just in a coma, and that was it. And it was a way for Marvel and Bendis to basically put him on the back burner, and then bring in Riri Williams as a character who I absolutely love. But the fact remains here, when it comes to Tony Stark being in a catatonic state, there were a couple things that happened. The first was that you really saw Amanda Armstrong picking up, really Amanda Armstrong and Mary Jane Watson picking up at his place, and we'll talk about them here in a second. And then you picked up with Tony Stark basically turning himself into an artificial intelligence, and then basically becoming the trainer for Riri Williams when she became the new Iron Man, more or less, when she was Ironheart. And so what this does is this initially picks up essentially at the Stark Expo, this whole event that Tony Stark puts on year after year in order to bring together some of the greatest minds. Now, Amanda Armstrong is really the one leading the charge on this whole project since Tony Stark is gone. Now, Amanda Armstrong was introduced as part of International Iron Man, and that dealt with the idea of Tony Stark tracking down his actual biological parents, because that was a holdover from Kieran Gillen, who had introduced the secret origin of Tony Stark and revealed that Howard and Maria were not actually his biological parents, and instead he was adopted. And so Bendis had kind of continued that trend going forward in the future of the Iron Man stories. And so in International Iron Man, he tracked down his actual mother, who was basically a rock star from the 80s. And then we still don't know who his biological father is, or at least we know now that the story's finished, but at this point in the story, we don't know. And so basically Amanda's kind of going through and saying, hey, look guys, we're putting on this whole Stark Expo because it's what Tony Stark would want. But from her perspective, this is a really crushing experience. And the reason why is because by and large, she never really got to know her son. And when it came to Tony Stark introducing himself and meeting Amanda for the first time, it was, hey, come back over here to Stark Industries, basically become the new CEO, which is something that he had implemented after he had essentially died. It was part of his, his last will and testament, but she never really got to know her son. Now, her and Mary Jane Watson have really been running the show ever since. Of course, Mary Jane Watson's involvement came by way of a combination of Dan Slott's Spider-Man and Brian Michael Bendis' Iron Man. But the idea here is that between the two of them, they're basically fending off the board of trustees. Is the board is trying to take over control of Stark Industries since Tony Stark isn't there. He was really the one person keeping them at bay. And so because of the fact that Tony Stark might as well be dead for all intents and purposes, she ends up bringing in Riri Williams. Now, at this point, we transition to a guy named Eric Lynch. Now, Eric Lynch is one of the higher ranking members of the board, but he's one of these guys who's really been kind of pushing the way for the board of trustees to be able to take everything over. And it's really just kind of lying in wait and saying, hey, look, it's only a matter of time, only a matter of time before you guys screw up. What's been going on really off panel and behind the scenes here is that Eric Lynch and the board have been exhausting every conceivable legal option they have. And essentially what it's come down to is that because Tony Stark has been gone for so long, and because the company really is supposed to be owned by Tony Stark, and the person who owns it isn't there, that gives all authority to the board of trustees. This is essentially a hostile takeover. Now, at this point, we transition away from Riri and all that kind of stuff, and we focus on Dr. Doom. And this is where things get a little crazy, is because what you had is you had Invincible Iron Man, and then you had the new Iron Man with Dr. Doom. And with Infamous Iron Man, this story arc that took place with Dr. Doom, because there were two distinctly separate books, when it got to the end of International Iron Man and it got to the conclusion, basically going into the end of Secret War, or I'm sorry, the end of Secret Empire with Bendis's Invincible Iron Man, he combined the two together. And that's why you see two distinctly different art styles, because as far far as most everybody's been able to guess, they were supposed to be two distinctly different books. But with Bendis basically getting out of Marvel, handing the reins over to whoever it is that comes next, the result is that they were just kind of crammed into a singular book. But the idea here is this is really more of like Bendis's take almost on the events of New Avengers. It's kind of a way for him to sort of bring that back. Now, for those of you guys who don't know what that means, back in the day, with Avengers being one of those titles that was ailing, because a lot of people think Avengers has always been successful. It's actually not true. Throughout the 90s, the only real successful titles Marvel had were Spider-Man and the various X-Men related titles. When the Avengers title was canceled, with Avengers disassembled and then relaunched as New Avengers, the first story arc was called The Raft, and it dealt with the idea that the villain Electro had been contracted by Elektra to essentially break all the prisoners out of the raft. And it was a way to kind of bring the New Avengers team together, but this is very much a repeat of that. And the reason why is because at Riker's Island, a whole bunch of people have escaped. Now, this is really just kind of a repeat of that, in the sense that you have infamous Iron Man, Dr. Doom, who basically responds, and there's a handful of people who have escaped. Now, we'll figure out who these guys are, but of course, this also sort of ties into the idea that Ben Grimm doesn't really trust infamous Iron Man. Now, one thing to bear in mind here, for those of you guys who have been watching for a little while, this took place before the events of Marvel 2 and 1. So that's one of the reasons why you don't really see Ben Grimm and Dr. Doom on good terms. And they, even during 2 and 1, they weren't really on good terms. But this takes place before that. But switching back over to Amanda and everybody, what you end up finding out here is basically the body of Tony Stark has vanished. The reason why this is so significant is because of the fact that with Tony Stark having been part of the superhero community for a long time, having been director of S.H.I.E.L.D., being really one of the founding members of the Avengers, having faced off and sided with the X-Men, he knows a lot. I mean, his hands are in everything. And so if somebody were to get their hands on him and then simply like start forcing him to divulge information, they could bring the entire security infrastructure of the world crashing down, to say nothing of how easy they'd be able to take out the various Avengers. Now, from here, what we end up doing is basically picking up with the arrival of a guy by the name of Hijack. Now, when it comes to David Bond, the reason why they call him Hijack is because of the fact that he literally hijacks vehicles, like, you know, technological stuff. Now, he originally made his appearance back in 2013, I'm pretty sure, with Uncanny X-Men Volume 3, Issue number 6. I'm not going to swear by that, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. But he was a Brian Michael Bendis creation. Now, anybody who's familiar with Bendis will tell you, more often than not, he'll use his own creations, or he'll use things that he's previously done to kind of push along stories that he's writing at the time. But Hijack showing up is really just like he's basically a merc. Like, he's here because he was hired by the Stark Board of Directors to essentially bring down like Riri Williams and all that kind of good stuff. Now, this is one of the funny things, because the suit that Riri has was not designed by Tony Stark himself. It was designed by her, but Tony Stark has been influencing her and teaching her how to use these different things. But when it comes to this whole thing and this situation popping off, for the most part, it's her just sort of taking guidance from Tony Stark, kind of outflying these various forces and so on and so forth, and then eventually getting outside the range of Hijack to the point that he can't really control these ships anymore. And then ultimately she ends up just kind of crash landing, and you know, or she makes her escape anyway, and then ends up crash landing in her own neighborhood, things like that. Of course, this also comes by way of Mary Jane Watson macing David Bond. of macing Hijack in order to take his concentration away. But it's kind of a cool little thing here. That's one of the cool things about Bendis writing, is that a lot of times he'll focus on smaller characters who normally wouldn't really have anything to contribute, but then gives them something as small as it is, and it just makes all the difference. And again, it's just kind of a way to develop characters. But the fact remains here, when it comes to really to Dr. Doom, Iron Man, just kind of an aside, not a great big huge thing. This will become important later on, but basically the guys who were broken out of Riker's Island are essentially like targeting him, really more just kind of like harassing him, bothering him, trying to find a way to like defeat him and kill him. Now, these are small time guys, living laser, different things like that. Nobody who was ever really significant. And so what we end up doing is picking up, of course, when Riri Williams crashes back in her local neighborhood, and she's talking to Xavier. And that's one of the cool things I like about Riri's character. For the most part, I've always loved her. Like, I always thought the development behind her was awesome. But she's also like this young girl. And when you're looking at someone like her who is trying to step into the role of becoming the new Iron Man, it is kind of funny because you have a tendency to sort of forget she's a teenage girl, which means she goes through teenage girl phases. There's all those small little things, you know, being nervous around boys, you know, boys that she likes, different things like that. And it's kind of a cool moment. But once she gets inside, we basically end up finding out that like her home is being rummaged through by like essentially, you know, groups that, or I guess, you know, a handful of people who were sent here by Stark Enterprises, by the board of directors. And they're really pulling out all the stops. Now, the way that Riri plays this is actually pretty smart. She basically says the entire place is not really booby trapped, but being monitored by like 17 separate cameras. And that if they end up basically saying, hey, look, we're going to continue continue with this, then like the whole thing will be turned into a video and then it'll be sent out there, which is kind of a significant moment. And so what we end up doing is actually transitioning to Tony Stark proper. Now, this is where things get a little hairy. Tony Stark just kind of fell out of this birthing container. That's really what it was. He just kind of fell out of a container of sorts, and we have no idea where he is. We have no idea how he got there. Instead, he's met by the arrival of his mother. Now, this really looks like a newborn Tony Stark. That's really how this appears in terms of the way he's drawn, designed, all that kind of good stuff. But the idea seems to be he's still in possession of all of his memories up to the modern day. Now, is it a cheap way to bring Iron Man back? Definitely. But how do you really bring Tony Stark back after he's quote unquote dead? You know, after he's essentially dead. But it's kind of interesting because as he goes through and starts talking to really his mother, they have this really, really touching, tender moment here. And it's him basically saying like, the one thing that allowed me to hold on is that it was basically you. Like what I've done is I've essentially rebooted myself, mind, body, and soul. I'm a recreated version of myself. When he's talking to her and he's kind of having this moment, it's like, hey, look, I always wanted us to meet. I always wanted us to see each other. And then you have Mary Jane Watson who walks in, you know, and Mary Jane Watson's like, well, you know, they're on their way. Everybody's showing up here. Everyone's been looking for you. And then he's met with a full contingent of the Avengers. I mean, everyone, you know, like Riri Williams and Moon Knight and like Storm and Vision and all that kind of stuff. You know, the X-Men are there. I mean, it's like the entire Marvel superhero community because of the fact that he's such a significant and important member, only for us to find out that James Rhodes is also there. And this is when we start to realize the whole thing is an illusion. It's basically a dream that he's having. And the reason why is because James Rhodes is dead. James Rhodes died, you know, really in the lead up to Civil War II. And so it's kind of a cool moment here. It's actually kind of interesting because when you're talking about this return of Tony Stark, it would have been a pretty easy situation to just say, and now he's back, done, you know, and it's like a 2-issue story. But to see Ben just kind of drag it out and sort of, you know, invoke all this character involvement is interesting because then what we do is we basically pick up with the arrival of Parker Robbins. Now, Parker Robbins was a character created by Brian K. Vaughan. He originally appeared in his own solo series called The Hood, and he's one of these interesting guys. He's not really on the level of Doctor Strange, but he's not a baseline human. He can kind of manipulate magic to a degree, and he basically fights demon energy or shoots demon energies from his guns. The difference here with the Hood is that he's actually achieved a lot of pretty significant things in terms of his supervillain career. I mean, he was inspired to become a supervillain. That's one of the reasons why he does what he does. But he's essentially really good at forming what is, for the most part, like the Masters of Evil. For those of you guys who don't know, back in the day, the Masters of Evil, if I remember correctly, I want to say it was a Roy Thomas creation. But anyway, it was basically an alliance of the most notable villains at the time that were basically villains of the Avengers. The roster sort of changed over the years when it came to the Masters of Evil. But with Parker Robbins forming his own kind of army, the roster also changed as well. But that's why you see small-time guys like Living Laser, because the Masters of Evil were people like Radiation Man, Ulysses Claw, small-time villains that even at that point in time weren't super relevant. They weren't really that big of a deal. But basically, Parker Robbins shows up and like turns his guns on Doctor Doom. And so it's really kind of one of these things where Bendis leaves us on like a minor cliffhanger, like a small little cliffhanger. And so what ends up happening here is Amanda starts to put 2 and 2 together, right? The mother of Tony Stark starts to put 2 and 2 together, and she's talking to like all the Avengers, like the Mighty Avengers and the whole 9 yards. I mean, it's like it's Black Panther, it is Luke Cage, it's Spider-Man. I mean, it's all these different characters. And the response is, we have no idea where Tony Stark is. No one can find him. This guy's off the radar. Now, this is kind of a cool thing, and it's actually an important thing to remember. And the reason why is because when it comes to someone like Tony Stark, when he was director of S.H.I.E.L.D., while he wasn't necessarily on the same level as like Nick Fury, he still has a much higher level of intelligence, but also access to everything that was going on with regards to S.H.I.E.L.D. He did learn about all these little nooks and crannies and secret locations and places like that here and there. And that's the reason why wherever Tony Stark is, he's totally off the reservation. Nobody can find him because no one knows the different places that he knows. It's just things that he was privy to as director of S.H.I.E.L.D. or figured out along the way. And this is when Amanda kind of starts putting 2 and 2 together. She's like, if Friday is the AI of Tony Stark that he created before he died, then she's a program. She does what she's programmed to do, and she's programmed to protect Tony Stark. And the response of Amanda Armstrong is, if she's programmed to protect Tony Stark, then then she has to know the location of Tony Stark. And then, of course, Friday's response to this whole interrogation is, I really don't know where he, I don't know where he is. The only way for me to know would be to basically be in his head. And that's when she jumps into to the AI construct of Tony himself. That's been helping out Riri Williams this entire time. And it's the coolest thing, because when she jumps in, she basically kind of switches bodies, kind of switches them back. And the question that's asked here is, where is Tony Stark? And the AI construct as Tony simply responds by saying, well, to be fair, no one ever asked me directly where he was, indicating this version of Tony knows exactly where real world Tony Stark is. And it's kind of funny because it's like, well, all they ever had to do was ask. Okay, so we are continuing on with Invincible Iron Man, and it's actually kind of cool. I mean, I'm pretty excited about this, because this is basically the return of Tony Stark, but it's one of these things where you can tell that Bendis had somewhat set the stage for what was supposed to come after this. Now, whether or not it was the plan of Bendis to do this and then continue writing and then ultimately jump ship and head over to DC Comics where the ship's not sinking, then we don't really know. Like, we don't know if that's the case or not. At this point, it's just kind of like Bendis set it up for things to come after. So in reality, it's really kind of like anybody's guess on what direction things going. But initially, this picks up really with Parker Robbins. Now, again, we talked about in the last video that Parker Robbins, the Hood, has really kind of been on this campaign to try to take out Victor Von Doom. Now, we didn't initially know why this was the case. Instead, it was basically Parker Robbins kind of reforming the sort of modern-day masters of evil, more or less, using some pretty low-level thugs, and then launching these little, small-time attacks against Dr. Doom, only for us to find out that the reason why he's doing this is because his goal is to basically steal the gold in Latveria. That's essentially the goal of Parker Robbins here, is to steal gold in Latveria. It's a pretty primitive goal, but then again, Parker Robbins was never really that great of a villain in the first place, and so it's one of the cool things that actually goes on here. It's one of the interesting situations. What we end up finding out is that one of the guys he's brought along, a guy by the name of Corruptor, has the ability to basically create these kind of this sort of psychoactive effect in the mind to force people to see like hallucinations or to have the body react in an exceedingly violent way, but he can only do it through like physical contact. But it's kind of a cool thing, because then at this point, we switch over to Tony Stark. Now remember, Tony Stark, despite the fact that he's kind of resurrected himself more or less in like a new body, basically, he's been having these hallucinations, with regards to like members of the superhero community and even his own family. And in this instance, he has a hallucination of his dad. Now, in reality, this is really more of like a subconscious concept working its way to the conscious mind, and then him basically dealing with it, specifically with regards to the fact that he was adopted, because this was a concept that Tony Stark never really dealt with proper, in the sense that like he knew that he was adopted, but he never really was able to come to terms with his father about it because his father was dead. But in this moment, when he's kind of going through this sort of hallucinogenic state, when his mind is sort of restructuring itself and when his body's physically recovering, he kind of has this internal argument with his father about the fact that, well, you never told me I was adopted, different things like that. But a really cool point's made here is that Howard Stark basically says, well, the fact that you're adopted is irrelevant. Like, you're still my son. Like, I raised you as my son. I taught you everything you know. I left you an empire. I am as good as. And in reality, it's true. While Tony Stark is adopted, the fact that Howard Stark taught him everything he needed to know about what it meant to be a man, to be successful, to build on his intelligence, those are the only things that really matter. His father was never in his life. His father was never there to teach him those lessons. Howard Stark was the one who was. And so really, if Tony hadn't been told that he was adopted, everything would still stand. Everything would still be the same. So there really is no difference here between Howard and the actual father of Tony. But the actual father of Tony will make an appearance here in a little while. Now, something else that's been going on here is that Friday has basically been kind of subverting her programming to a degree and going through and like hunting down or trying to trace down the location of Tony Stark, which they were ultimately successful in doing. And it was actually an old shield bunker. So again, kind of hitting back at the old Nick Fury era of comics where he always had these safe houses. But when they get in there, they end up finding the armor that Tony Stark was in, but he's basically outside of his armor. He's essentially left. And so it's kind of cool because he's out there doing his own thing, presumably trying to find a way to come back. Now, another funny little caveat here, this is kind of wild, is what ends up happening is that while Riri Williams is pondering the idea of walking away because all of her tech was basically taken by Stark Industries by the board of trustees, when she's sitting there basically mulling over the idea of returning to MIT, she's met with the arrival of Blade. Now, apparently Blade works for S.H.I.E.L.D. I have no idea. It's been 15 years since I read a Blade comic, so I can't tell you what in the world Blade's been doing all this time. I mean, I remember him from the movie, and that's it. Like, it's I know almost nothing about Blade. Anything that's happened in the last 15 years, I don't know. But she ultimately ends up basically traveling back to MIT. Now, when she does, what we end up finding out here is that there are a handful of people who are basically trying to track down Tony Stark, in addition to Riri Williams herself. One of them is Tony Ho, actually the daughter of Yinsen Ho, the person that helped Tony Stark build the Mark I when he was kidnapped in Vietnam. And then the other one, or really there's a couple others, but one of them is Arno Stark. Now, if I'm being honest here, I don't really like the way that Bendis handles Arno Stark. He's just kind of like a guy who's there. And that's sort of disappointing, because for those of you guys who read Kieran Gillen's run of Iron Man, Arno Stark played a huge role. The idea of him, basically, of it being revealed that Arno is the actual biological biological son of Howard and Maria, that he's basically smarter than Tony Stark, you know, that he's kind of reduced here to just being a guy who needs the help of Ruby Williams in order to crack a code. It's kind of weird because it's like saying like Reed Richards can't figure something out on his own, and so he has to go to Iron Man to do it. I mean, you're talking about one of the smartest people on the planet. So the fact that Otto Stark would need anybody is a little mind-boggling here. It's a little weird to me. But again, it does give a pretty cool role to Riri in the sense that she has something to contribute here. But at this point, we basically end up dealing with Iron Man being more or less defeated by Parker Robbins. Now, it's really more of a smaller thing, but this whole situation basically has him traveling back to Liberia, and then basically Parker Robbins arriving with this huge, you know, army of street-level thugs, basically, and then all of them using their various powers to take down Doctor Doom as Iron Man. Now, it's kind of a funny thing here because Bendis is somewhat playing on the idea that Doctor Doom is, you know, quote-unquote reformed, right? I mean, if this was classic Doctor Doom from like Fantastic Four Annual number 2 or number 4, whatever, he would have just made short work of him. He would have just killed them all, and that would have been the end of it. He would have just been like, "You're done. Like, you guys are all dead." But the fact that he's kind of trying to turn over a new leaf, trying to do the right thing, basically means that it's a way for them to subvert his power, to essentially overcome him, and then in turn defeat him. Now, some of it's also because of the fact that there's just so many people there that they just basically overwhelm him. The problem with this is that once they manage to get through, they manage to essentially like break into his armor, he's gone. He's basically teleported out. And so that information is basically gone with him. And so again, it's essentially Parker Robbins kind of sitting around and saying, okay, in order for us to find the location of the gold in Latveria, we have to track down Tony Stark because that's where Doctor Doom is going to go. He's going to go find Tony. And so again, it's kind of like this mad rush. Everybody's looking to find Tony Stark. Now, switching back to Blade, what we end up finding out here is